This is the story of the monster's empire formed by our human protagonist Yukiya. He was working hard and also supported by his sister Channel, who got a towel for sweating Yukiya. While wiping sweat, Yukiya was greeted by elf and dwarf kings. Yukiya welcomed them, and the dwarf king offered the finest steak he brought from his territory. Others simply asked Yukiya how the preparations for the feast were going on, and they wished to lend a hand to Yukiya as well, and others divided their tasks as well on their own accord. Yukiya glanced over surroundings and figured there was no other place with such an existence of many species living in harmony. Yukiya was once a court tamer, so whenever any monster needed help, he reached out his hand to ask them if they were okay in the most polite ways. However, having this many demons tamed, he would soon be the one with power enough to become the demon king itself, with so many of his friends beside him. Now, some time ago, the place where it all started was the capital of Zeals, in the place where tamed monsters were kept and taken care of. Yukiya was just a court tamer, or like a caretaker of all these beasts, and he was a bit surprised noticing he got some of the dragon's waste on his cheek from somewhere. He was despised by it, and then another caretaker named Elaine showed up and apologized for the mistake. But he didn't really look apologetic, and even burst into laughter along with others. Yukiya understood this was intentionally done, so he just sighed, telling Elaine to watch himself, and walked away. Yukiya went to a white dragon named Patra and asked if it could handle the dirt on him. Patra instantly cleaned it with magic, and Yukiya expected that much from the white dragon and praised him for helping him. Then Yukiya heard some groans by the other caretakers who were jealous of Yukiya managing to be able to tame the dragons and get paid for not doing much. Yukiya stated dragons were as fickle as the wind to care about, and he was in charge of keeping things like that while preparing meals. The guys mocked that it was all a pretense and Yukiya was just having fun getting paid for the legacy left behind by his old man. Yukiya figured these guys were just jealous, so he ignored them and told Elaine to serve the usual meals he prepared to the beasts. The Elaine guy and others commented that Yukiya's calm demeanor wasn't going to last for long, which alerted Yukiya, who sensed something was going on for sure. He walked out, not paying much attention to it since he had more work to do, and that was when one of many other small beasts approached Yukiya out of nowhere. Yukiya was startled, as it wasn't just one but all of the young beasts ambushing at him together. Yukiya didn't dislike this ambush since he cared about these beasts, and it was also his duty to take care of every creature in this palace. While Yukiya assessed the condition of all creatures, he recalled that these creatures were actually tamed by Yukiya's rainforest family, which was known for its taming abilities and served under the royal family for generations. However, that was also why if Yukiya were to be gone, the dragon would break free from its chains and horse and other beasts would be too wild to handle for the soldiers, while the birds would no longer deliver the letters, and to prevent from any of that happening, Yukiya had to give it his all to keep everything functioning smoothly. But his fate had a tragedy coming for him, as Yukiya was left frozen in awe when the king broke a shocking news to him. Yukiya asked again what the king said. Then the Secretary of Finance, bitter, just yelled at Yukiya that the king had fired him because in their eyes, Yukiya was just a freeloader enjoying the privileges that come with being the court tamer. Yukiya couldn't feel good about this, and then he only got more bad-mouthed by other nobles present in the court, saying Yukiya's role wasn't that significant here in the castle. Yukiya had his doubts that one of the nobles who just bad-mouthed him was Elaine's father, so this must be something like a plot to get Yukiya out and put Elaine in his place. Thus, they made it happen through their close contact with finance head Bitter, and that was when Yukiya stepped forward to ask His Majesty to hear him out once. Yukiya explained to the king that if he were to be stripped of his duty, his bond with the beasts would shatter and they would stop listening to anyone. The nobles accused Yukiya of him just trying to cling to his freeloader position with such lies. The king had some doubts, so he asked his Chancellor Harble what he thought of this situation. The Chancellor gave a thought and stated they should naturally cut off the unnecessary expenses. Yukiya figured the Lord Bitter must have already ensnared the Chancellor Harble, and now that Harble said that, there was no one who would dare to oppose him since he had the highest authority after the king in this country. After that, the king made the final statement that Yukiya Rainforest should be relieved of his duties effective today, and instead of executing Yukiya for freeloading on them, he would be exiled from the kingdom. Then Bitter placed his hand on Yukiya's shoulder and wished him good luck for the future. He then mocked Yukiya in front of everyone, saying if Yukiya was really so good at taming like he claimed, then he should be able to unleash his strength in any land he chooses and flourish there. Yukiya didn't feel provoked by it, and with that he returned to his Rainforest family's manor to tell everything that happened to his mother Sharia and sister Channel, that he had been exiled. This news surely came out as a surprise to both of them, But his mother figured that must have happened since Yukiya was quite the diligent worker, so he didn't fit in the ways of how court work. Yukiya was thankful for his mother's supportive statements, and as for his sister Channel, she always thought her brother would mess up someday, so they should be grateful for at least getting exiled instead of being executed. Channel asked him if he had somewhere to for them, to which Yukiya replied it might not sound that good, but they needed to hurry because the finance head bidder was sure to send assassins after his family. Channel didn't mind the haste to leave since she knew her brother would definitely be successful in any place, and given that, Yukiya decided they would leave the country as soon as possible and head to the northern parts of the continent. Channel realized that part mostly had forests and understood what Yukiya was probably planning, but just to be sure she asked him if he was serious about this. Yukiya agreed and said since that forest was untouched, it would take some work but could surely be turned into a cozy heaven for them. And for that, he decided to first tame the monsters and wildlife around there to establish their stronghold. Yukiya knew they would need a lot of tamed beasts to make this work, and by taming them the abilities of both tamed monster and tamer would increase. He let her mother know that they would make sure to pay good to those who would work under them. Channel also stood up to prepare for it, and then Yukiya's butler, Robin, called him out and asked if he could accompany Yukiya on this journey as well. He wished to be of some help to Yukiya, and he didn't mind that. So once being allowed, the butler quickly came and marked the safest route to the north to get Yukiya out of the country, and as for carriage arrangements he suggested taking help from a certain merchant. Yukiya was amazed by Robin's sharp skills, which made it as if Robin had always been prepared for this. Robin modestly said Yukiya just overestimated his skills, and then he went to quickly pack his stuff as well. Yukiya found Robin to be the kind to take being useful to a whole other level that he didn't think even adventurers could pull off. Although he wondered if someone like Robin were to be sent as an assassin, he would be a goner for sure. Later, Yukiya went to the merchant to buy the carriage, and the merchant suggested why don't he just rent instead of buying it. Yukiya replied he just needed to have it quickly given the shortage of time, no matter the money it cost. The merchant was shocked to see so many gold coins at once for a carriage. But unfortunately he had to mention to Yukiya that currently the only horses they had were not that good with people, and without a skilled driver they won't even function properly. Yukiya said if that was all then it would be no problem for him, and the merchant should get started with getting things ready. Channel figured those aggressive horses shouldn't be a problem, since her brother was surely able to tame anything in the blink of an eye. Yukiya claimed the horses should be fine as long as they weren't some magical beast, as they were hard to tame, to which Channel stated that still won't change a thing, since her brother was a genius who could tame any beast with ease. Yukiya smiled as he recalled hearing those same words from his father, who praised Yukiya after recognizing Yukiya's unparalleled taming skills ever born in the history of their family. Yukiya's father was surprised to witness Yukiya managing to tame just about any creature of the palace instantly, even the dragon. Yukiya also remembers at that time his father was sick, which brought him to consider if the short lives of their family heads was because of the pressures of palace life. He has never heard tales of their ancestors living a long life either. Channel told him it shouldn't concern him, since compared to the time when her father was carrying out palace duties, Yukiya was a far cry from their father, and she still couldn't understand how many beasts Yukiya could actually tame. She was curious to find out his limits, which basically made Yukiya think she wanted to push him to limits even if it killed him. Channel stated there wasn't anything bad in checking out her brother's true powers, and from what she expects, Yukiya should be able to tame even 100 dragons without breaking a sweat. Then Yukiya told her she should also help him out later by taming some beasts to clear out forest lager. It was when they heard loud sounds coming from outside, so Yukiya immediately went to check out what was happening and saw the merchant being thrown around while trying to handle 2 aggressive horses. Channel didn't expect these horses to be this much wild, and Yukiya remarked these horses were at least twice the size of the royal palace's horses. The troubled merchant alerted Yukiya to run away as the horses approached towards them, but instead Channel told the merchant to just take a deep breath and relax. The merchant couldn't afford to do so given the situation he was in, and then Channel instructed her tamed large eagle named Vito to help out the merchant, and it carried Vito by its claws to take him to a safer spot. Meanwhile, the wild stallions were right in front of Yukiya as their shadows loomed over him. Yukiya then casted his tame spell over the horses, and suddenly their wild eyes turned calm and docile. They began treating Yukiya as their master with respect and care. Channel praised her eagle Vito for carrying out its task to carry the merchant well, and the merchant thanked her for the assist. And that aside, the merchant couldn't believe his eyes how calm the horses were now, as if some magic happened. Channel glanced over Yukiya, who was cherishing the horses, seeing which she smiled and proudly boasted about him being her brother capable of taming any beast. Soon enough, the carriage was prepared with those tamed horses attached to it, and Yukiya named them as Quell and Elder, and Robin the butler was the one handling the carriage ride. Yukiya went and sat inside the carriage and asked his mother if she was comfortable, since she hadn't traveled a lot and was not used to riding in a carriage. Charla assured him it was fine and they couldn't do much since this was a hurried trip. Chanel asked Yukiya if he was ignoring asking her howabouts, which left Yukiya stuttering in response. Robin then signaled everyone it was time to leave, and he started their journey by harnessing the horses. Robin informed Yukiya that today they would be covering the distance until the village of Rizdal. Yukiya understood it, and then he told Mother and Chanel to rest while he kept watch over their surroundings. Chanel told him he could rest since her eagle Vito was keeping an eye on surroundings, so there was no need for Yukiya to exert his energy. Yukiya thanked her for being considerate, and then she suggested to him to have a familiar just like her to keep around him. Yukiya mentioned he never needed one since he was always surrounded by other tame beasts in the royal palace. Charla said he still should consider that now, just like how she had her cute tamed mouse named Steward who was always there with her. Chanel stated it would have been easier for them to travel if Yukiya only brought back a dragon, but he couldn't do something like that as it would have gotten him marked as a criminal. Chanel insisted he still could have easily escaped by himself, but Yukiya had no intention of putting on a grand show for the nation. And besides, he didn't dislike spending time together as a family. Charla and Chanel appreciated him being so thoughtful of his family, and Charla and Chanel thanked Yukiya for looking after them. Yukiya asked her again what she said, which made her mad, but he reasoned it was just odd to think Chanel would say something like thanks to him. Chanel felt a little embarrassed since it wasn't like her nature, but she was done dealing with this, and those journeys went quiet for some time, with a tension that even Robert could sense. Meanwhile, at the royal palace, Bitter was having a party with Mains over their successful plot with the objective of getting Yukiya out and enjoying the funds he was getting for themselves. Bitter laughed it off saying how smoothly things went, while Mains buttered the chancellor saying the day was not far when Bitter would become future prime minister. However, Mains doubted if it was wise for them to promise anything to the king, which made Bitter doubt if Mains had doubt on his son Lane's abilities. Mains claimed that wasn't the case, and Bitter continued there was nothing to worry about for their plan if only Elaine got on the good side of the king. Mains assured Bitter he was right onto it, and his son Elaine was already controlling the things here with tamed beasts. Other nobles who were part of this plot added their sweet talks, saying how envious it was to see Mains having a son like Elaine. Now Bitter raised another concern of theirs, that if Yukiya were to make a name for himself out there, he would surely catch the king's eye. Mains asked if Bitter had taken steps to watch over Yukiya's directions, to which Bitter replied that apparently Yukiya chose to head north of all places. Other nobles laughed upon the mention of it, since the North Forest was said to be cursed and nothing that goes there comes out alive. Bitter said that would make things more convenient for them, since they could get Yukiya killed the instant he arrived there. Bitter made remarks that Yukiya's family was also foolish and detestable to think they went along with Yukiya. Whereas Robin was riding the carriage and informed his master Yukiya about them soon reaching their destination for the day. Yukiya glanced outside and saw the town of Rizdal, and as he began to come out, Robin mentioned it must be like breathing fresh air for Yukiya since he never ventured out of the royal capital, and Yukiya agreed with it. Later, when he entered the town, he noticed the vegetable-selling lady didn't seem that happy since there were not many vegetables to sell, while some shops were even closed, and the cause of this seemed to be lack of crops farming. Yukiya asked Chanel if it was like this everywhere outside the capital, and Chanel sent out her eagle to check around the village on Yukiya's words. She informed the whole village that it seemed to be the same, and mentioned having heard that Rizdal used to thrive. But now looking at it, it seemed like something was going on. Yukiya wondered if there was any way out of this. Chanel added if her brother feels motivated to help out, any challenge would become a piece of cake. For example, he could tame beasts and nurture them so well that even villagers here would be able to handle them, so that it would lead to villagers getting more help in producing better results in farming and transporting goods. From the mention of taming beasts, Yukiya remembered the palace beasts and wondered if they were safe, since those other caretakers just ignored their duties and sometimes even threatened them. Then Yukiya's mother told him to focus on what was in front of him, and if he wished to help out then he should put all his heart to it, because otherwise Yukiya wouldn't be any different than the guy who tries to help out a man from falling down a cliff, but ends up falling himself. So she wished he would stay absolutely resolute in his determination to save others. Yukiya agreed she was right, and he decided to start with talking to the chief of Rizdal village. Later they were greeted by the village chief, who had heard of the legendary family of Tamer's Rainforest family. Yukiya asked what happened to this village, to which the chief replied that in previous times, supplies used to be sent from the village like crops and gold, but now the roads used for transportation were now blocked by monsters, who attacked anyone passing through there. Because of that, not a single soul managed to reach the capital, and they were also abandoned by the traveling merchants. So right now, they were just scraping by with self-sufficiency, but their crops were also now being attacked by monsters recently. Yukiya understood the problem was monsters, so he called out Channel, and she replied that she was already looking over the area to find the location of monsters with the eyes of her eagle Vito. When she found monsters, she informed Yukiya that culprits behind most of the damage were goblins, who were even now feeding on robbed food. Yukiya figured he should be able to manage this, so he assured the village chief to leave this to him. The village chief was at a loss for words to express his gratitude, and he assured Yukiya to request him anything within their capabilities. Yukiya mentioned he would need 2 favors, one to allocate a little portion of the village profits gained after this incident, and it could wait if needed, and secondly, Yukiya wanted the chief to be aware that Yukiya's family could be targeted by capital if it was known to the outside. The village chief understood, and he didn't want the fear of an unknown assassin to hold them back, so he accepted Yukiya's conditions. After that, Yukiya and Channel went out, and she mentioned it was quite surprising to see Yukiya negotiating gains instead of jumping in to help like usual. Yukiya said he wasn't that dumb, because in the end the immense fortune of their family was built by ancestors' hard work, so they should cherish it instead of just living off it. And besides, he wanted to leave something behind with his own hands as well, be it wealth or the bonds with people. He figured their connection with the village of Rizdol would keep reaping benefits, and when the village faced troubles, they would be there to lend a hand. This was his definition of going all out if he wanted to help, and Charlotte was impressed by Yukiya's wisdom. Now Yukiya went off to the forest to handle this matter, and he asked the others to rest at the inn in the meantime. But to his surprise, Channel expressed her wish to go as well. Yukiya asked if she didn't trust him to handle this, and so they ended up going to the forest together. Yukiya got some bird to tell him directions to the nest of goblins, and after thanking the bird, he went there as quietly as possible. Channel asked him if he was really going to do this, since it seemed like there were about 100 goblins in just one nest. Yukiya reasoned if they managed to tame the goblins, it would become a valuable asset as they could help him with labor while carrying out expansion, and this would also sort out the trouble villagers were facing. He figured they should be nearby now and looked around, and just then he got low in bushes upon the sight of goblins seemingly having some quarrel among them. Channel could also see this looked like it, and Yukiya decided to calm this down before their quarrel ends up increasing and harming Channel. He quickly stood up and used tame skill on the goblins, and in an instant all the goblins present here were tamed by Yukiya's amazing skill. Channel asked surprisingly just how many goblins he tamed at once, and if he was really okay, since taming was supposed to take a toll on a tamer's health. Yukiya stated he was totally fine, which again reminded her just how monstrous his brother's power was. Now Yukiya went to the goblins and asked what was the fuss they were making all about. All the goblins began speaking at once, causing only more confusion, and Yukiya told them to speak one by one. He learned that on one side, there were goblins who have been raiding the village fields, while on the other hand there were those goblins who insisted they shouldn't lay a hand on humans. Yukiya told them either way ever since they attacked on the highway, there seemed to be a request for subjugating the goblins, which flinched all of them, and the goblins immediately began requesting for help. Yukiya assured them that he wasn't here to bring them any harm, and to their surprise, he asked them to join him in venturing into the deeper parts of the forest where there won't be any humans, and they could live together in peace. He also promised they would have plenty to eat, and there won't be any fights since he would make sure everyone lived in peace. The goblins liked the sound of it, and they right away accepted Yukiya's suggestion, after which Yukiya told them if there was a connection with other monsters, they could also gather them, and as many as possible would be helpful. Soon, the goblins brought the others, and to Yukiya's surprise, there were also orcs and kobolds mixed in the monsters the goblins brought. Yukiya was now surrounded with many monsters from small to large ones, even bird and tree monsters. He didn't expect that many, and Channel reasoned it was still fine since it would just speed things up for them. She didn't think taming this many monsters shouldn't pose a problem for her brother, and with that, Yukiya stepped forward and closed his eyes as he casted Tame on all of the monsters present around them. The monsters standing here suddenly received a boost in their powers, and they even looked visibly stronger, more cheerful, and friendly with each other, especially towards Yukiya. Channel remarked her brother was really something to be able to tame even hundreds of more monsters like this, and at this rate the day wasn't far off when he might be called as the Demon King. The very next day it was about time for Yukiya to leave, and the chief of the village thanked him for everything he did for their sake, and the chief promised to take care of the horses Yukiya had given to him. Channel just stated if fortunately they didn't have horses, they might have to leave some goblins behind instead to help out the villagers, which would be a bit troublesome. However, now the village chief was extremely grateful to Yukiya for sorting out even the problem with fields, but Yukiya was confused as he didn't do anything about that. It was when the village chief told him that his butler Robin apparently restored all the fields which were once devastated by monsters. Robin was happy to be of help, while Yukiya was bummed thinking, when did Robin get the chance to do other things? Not only had he helped them, but the villagers were also astonished by Robin's skills in organizing things. Yukiya was kind of aware of it, and could imagine Robin really doing all of that, and that aside the village chief expressed his gratitude to Robin as well. Yukiya then asked the village chief to come by the place he would make after the road to the north became safe. Yukiya figured he could now sit in the carriage while letting the monsters she tamed pass ahead of them to ensure the safety of the path. It was when Yukiya got called out by the village chief, and to his surprise, all the villagers were there standing to see him off. Everybody cheered for Yukiya and thanked him for all that he did for them. Yukiya smiled upon receiving such a warm goodbye, and his mother mentioned that the first tamer in the world must have also met gratitudes such as these like Yukiya. Hearing that, Yukiya nodded in agreement and hoped to become a person who will inspire hope in others one day as well. Meanwhile, in the Zeal's kingdom, the castle was echoing with the voice of Princess Milia asking her father, the king, about why he banished the Rainforest family. The king asked her back why she was making a fuss over this as if she had seen some ghost, to which Milia replied that it was indeed a grave mistake of him to dismiss Yukiya from his position and then even banishing his family out of the country. King told her to calm down and said it would be fine since even Milia had skills for taming monsters. And for now, even after Yukiya was gone, nothing seemed to have changed with the monsters either. Milia exclaimed there was indeed some change, as the effects of taming were fading, and there wasn't even anyone who could control those beasts and dragons. King stated there were other caretakers, but she shouted if her father had even seen those caretakers doing any work before. Then Lord Maines came and asked Princess Milia if she was dissatisfied with his son Elaine's performance, but she couldn't say anything straight up in his face. So indirectly she asked Maines if he had something against Yukiya, to which he replied with a question of what does that have to do with princesses. Milia saw this as a waste of time, and she turned saying she must call Yukiya back at once. The king stopped her and said that the Rainforest family surely made monumental contributions to the management of familiars, especially during the era of their first leader who laid down the very foundations of their knights. It only made her ask more seriously why banish Yukiya then, to which the king just replied that because of their past achievements, he at least didn't sentence death to Yukiya. Milia couldn't understand this stupidity of her father, whereas he said it was just Yukiya's ancestors who worked, but Yukiya was just freeloading on the castle's budget. Maines agreed to that and accused Yukiya's family of siphoning off vast rewards from the treasury, which makes them nothing but pests. Thus he recommended the Princess Milia to open up her eyes, otherwise it would seem to him like she had already been tamed by Yukiya as well. She slapped off his approaching hand and called him a scoundrel as she walked away from there. She knew the seriousness of the matter, because as a tamer herself, she knew how tough it was to tame those beasts of the castle, and even then it was impossible for her to command all the creatures in the palace at once. Milia decided to do what she could and began walking towards somewhere. Meanwhile, in the northern forest, Yukiya reached the furthest place they could go with the carriage, so after coming out from it, Yukiya summoned a magic box used to store things and put the whole carriage inside it like no big deal. He figured now everyone else should be waiting for them deeper in the woods, so after walking a little his eyes met the sight of monsters in the middle of creating a settlement with tree woods. There seemed to be even more creatures than before, like flowers and so on. The multiplying number only left Yukiya in shock, and then Channel asked him if he was really going to tame all of these monsters as well. He reasoned it was obvious that these monsters were all gathered here as they wanted to be tamed, so he figured it would be a win-win situation for both since even the goblins he tamed have become stronger than before. Channel suggested she could also help out with some of the taming responsibilities, because Yukiya needs to conserve his energy as they might have to face something dangerous like a dragon later on. Yukiya's mother Charla also stepped up to help him out with taming the monsters she could tame as well. With this decided, Channel got started right away and both she and Charla casted tame spells on the monsters they could take under them. They were costly small monsters like plant ones and bug types, along with some insect-like monsters. However, Channel faced a little headache after taming them, and Yukia gave her a potion right away to deal with the headache. Channel didn't expect just a handful of monsters would pack so much magical energy to make it pressuring for her to tame them, which only made her more surprised about the number of monsters Yukia was taming without breaking a sweat. Yukia then asked Charla if she was okay, to which she replied she was fine since she focused on taking only the plant and insect types she was compatible with. Yukia then took a look at the monsters and stated even if most of them were low-level ones, they could still make them work, and Charla added she would like to help as well however she could, to make sure she won't be a burden on him. Yukia accepted her help and told her to come up with a plan on whatever she wanted to do and carry it out. Meanwhile, it was on him now to see the remaining monsters, so Yukia turned around and roughly imagined there were about 10,000 monsters left to be tamed. Channel told him that much would be pushing it too far on him, but Yukia just cast a tame spell on the monsters at once, and he was all done with it instantly. He was shocked by how easy it went for him, and more surprisingly he himself felt the power surging within him. Yukia remarked that even after taming thousands, he doesn't feel a single dent on his power. Charla stated it must be because he still had a lot of room to grow, while Channel was left in vain seeing the gap between her brother and her only rising like that. Yukia put that aside and said for now they should take some help with their new friends to create a cozy place to live. It was when Robin came to inform Yukia that he had already taken the liberty to get the goblin head start on building Yukia's home. Yukia found it really impressive, and then a wolf called for Yukia and led him in a direction into the bushes. Yukia followed and ended up finding a spirit fairy there, seeing which Yukia wondered why did it come here. The fairy informed Yukia that their king wished to see him, and when Yukia was a bit confused from the sudden invitation, the fairy explained that their race refers to the king of elves as their king. Yukia's surprise reaction was normal, since elves were said to be a mysterious race that stays away from humans and lives deep within the enchanted woods, so the question why they sent a messenger to Yukia was surely strange. Yukia then learned from the fairy that the elf king also wished to meet Yukia himself here, but apparently to Yukia's surprise, he would make his grand arrival in 3 years. The years part was an unexpected one. Then the fairy explained it was because elves had a different perspective of time than those of humans. Yukia figured either way if the elves were not coming soon, he should just get back to improving his living space, but suddenly he sensed a great deal of magic energy, and even the air around them changed. The fairy mentioned this means the elf king was near, which made Yukia wonder why was the elf king coming in just 3 minutes when it was expected for 3 years. Soon, the sounds of some horses approaching came, and Yukia witnessed the sight of a couple of elves on those flying horses. It was pretty clear after looking at the elf in front that he was the elf king with a sharp look in his eyes just like his pointy ears. The elf king Rick asked Yukia if he was the master of this place, and setting that aside, Yukia first mentioned how odd it was for the elf king to arrive much earlier than he was told. Rick stated that he kind of had a hasty nature, especially among his kind, and Yukia could feel the sense of king nature from Rick as he hesitantly asked Rick why he was here, since Yukia didn't have anything to entertain the king with. Rick replied it was nothing to worry about, since he wasn't really here to do the talking at all, as he began emitting an extreme amount of magic pressuring Yukia. Yukia quickly asked Channel to step back as Rick casted attack nature spells towards Yukia. Yukia could feel insane strength behind the magic attacks, and when he glanced to have an understanding of the situation, he noticed even the trees themselves began to bend to become Rick's tools to ambush Yukia and Channel. It was when Rick gave a warning to Yukia that any being that threatens the forest must be eliminated without exception, as his eyes showed extreme hostility towards Yukia. Upon this warning from the elf king Rick, Yukia and Channel's expression grew stiff, as they suddenly were the target of the threat from elf king. Yukia asked Channel to run away with Mother, but Rick didn't allow that and blocked her path with the tree branches, which outgrown in front of them. Rick stated that the forest only thrives alongside the elves, and he wouldn't let humans roam here freely like monsters. It was when Yukia noticed a wolf under him was about to be caught and attack, so he risked his life to protect the wolf, and seeing this spectacle left the elf king Rick shocked, because he believed humans weren't the kind type creatures. So why did Yukia help that monster? Yukia frowned and stated he would obviously help his friends, seeing as the elf king found it odd for a human to consider monsters as his allies. Yukia described that monsters were not harmful to him since they were bonded through taming, and what's more, it was the monsters here themselves came before Yukia to the forest wanting to be tamed by him. Thus, angered Yukiya declared they were his companions, and he wouldn't let anyone harm them, and that was when the monster himself stepped forward and growled at Rick to protect Yukiya. Rick was surprised by it. Then his fairy Ryron came to inform King Rick that Yukiya doesn't seem to be an enemy, and this human might be able to change the problem with Yggdrasil. Upon hearing that, Rick felt a little tense and asked Yukiya for his name, after which Rick got down from his horse to apologize for his behavior towards Yukiya before. He introduced himself properly as the King of Elves, Rick, and mentioned that he had an unexpected situation for which he wished to speak with Yukiya. Later, they went to Rick's house to have a discussion over the table. Yukiya was a bit amazed by how much the butler Robin got done with the help of others, as if they were some seasoned servants. Now at the beginning of discussion, Rock apologized again and said he was just worried for the forest because if these woods vanish, his race elves would cease to exist of being unable to wield their magic without forest. Yukiya told Rick to raise his head and not worry about it, and Rick remarked Yukiya was truly an understanding person. Rick wished to greet Yukiya properly at his house with some tea, and for now Yukiya stated it was his turn to show proper hospitality to his guests. Then the elf girl with Rick, who was his sister, asked Rick elegantly to let her introduce herself to others as well. Yukiya found her elegant nature cute, and he noticed her vibes set her apart from the other elves. Now Rick figured he should introduce his sister since she was shy, so he told Yukiya she was Rin, and technically since Rick was the king, Rin held a high authority as king's sister. Yukiya was confused about the authority part, so Rick took the liberty to explain that in their realm, the king doesn't make the decisions alone and most of them were actually made by the elders. Rick stated he was still very young at just 300 years old, so making some mistakes like attacking Yukiya were bound to happen with his inexperience. Yukiya was shocked by hearing 300 years old was just young for Rick, and next Rick introduced his loyal servant retinue as well. After that, Yukiya introduced himself and followed it up with introducing his sister Chanel and their mother Charla. Rick took as Yukiya was something like a king, so with utmost respect he told Yukiya to feel free to have this forest and claim it as his rainforest territory. Yukiya asked Rick what was the purpose behind this generosity, to which Rick explained it was simply because he wished to forge a pact between the elves of Yggdrasil village and Rainforest family. Yukiya began to get what Rock was asking of them, and Rick simplified that he just wanted to have a vow of peace on both sides, and along with it, he also wanted to entrust Yukiya with the handling of the new intruders in the forest in future. The main reason for it was because Rick believed elves were too slow to act on anything, unlike the impatient self-Rick. Chanel told Yukiya this was an incredible proposal, and also having an alliance with the elves was unheard of across the whole continent. Yukiya wondered if they could even call this forest a nation for now since it wasn't developed yet. Charla added it could be solved later, and Robin also believed this alliance could be a significant step towards recognizing this land as a nation. Rick assured that elves would do their best to help Yukiya, and he took this decision solely on personal interest because even since he met Yukiya, Rick felt a longing to forge a connection with him. His sentiments were also justified when his fairy Ryron showed trust for Yukiya, even if her race was one who doesn't trust anyone easily. Now he asked Yukiya what he thought about it, to which Yukiya replied it would be his honor to form this alliance. After deciding this, the elf king Rick summoned an agreement with magic to create a pact with Yukiya that would bind both of their souls to keep this pact. Yukiya was fazed by witnessing the contract magic, since it was a very complex magic to exist in history. Rick mentioned if it was Yukiya, he should be able to pick up this magic eventually, and setting that aside, Yukiya read all the details in the agreement to make sure everything was fine. Rin assured him to rest easy that this contract magic couldn't be used to trick others, since forging a pact with this contract was a very serious thing monitored by the spirits themselves. So with that in mind, she just wanted to assure him it was safe but couldn't speak any further due to her shy nature and red face. Yukiya thanked her for the reassurance, which only made her even more shy, while Yukiya could see that Rin just spoke her heart out right now. Now, Yukiya channeled his magic into the agreement to sign it, and suddenly, some magic from both Yukiya and Rick was sent into the contract, and Rick announced he and Yukiya were now allies for forever. He offered a handshake to Yukiya on the founding of their alliance, and Yukiya, understanding the sentiments, shook Rick's hand in return. Rick stated now that their alliance was formed, he wanted to ask Yukiya the main question of why he brought so many monsters with him to the forest. After that, Yukiya told his story from the start for Rick. Hearing Rick wondered if that kingdom was out of its mind to exile someone like Yukiya. And that aside, Yukiya stated that because of all that happened, he had been gathering allies searching for a place to call home and ended up coming here. Rick understood and expressed his surprise to see the massive number of monsters under Yukia's tame. It made him interested enough to ask how powerful was Yukia's taming and what kind of monsters she could handle. Yukia replied he never thought about to what extent he could tame. Then Channel intervened, saying her brother was truly one of a kind among tamers, since he could take a horde of dragons in a single strike effortlessly. This statement brought only more astonishment to Rick and Rin's face, and then Rick mentioned that given the circumstances, he had a favor to ask if Yukia. Suddenly, one of the elves under Rick asked in surprise if King Rick meant to talk about that monstrous beast with Yukia. Yukia wondered what it could be about. Then Rick explained that it was actually about a divine beast nobody was able to control. Apparently, this divine beast has plunged Rick's nation into crisis time and time again, and right now it was sealed away using the power of the World Tree in their nation. Yukia was astounded as he had an idea of what it could be, since there were legendary tales passed down about a legendary entity spoken of in myths, capable of wreaking havoc with each step due to its colossal size and thus resulting in threatening every race in its path. To confirm, Yukia asked if it was the spirit turtle, to which Rick agreed it was exactly that, but with a more serious expression. Rick put up his request for Rick to tame that divine beast before it's too late. Yukia asked if he really heard Rock write about him wanting Yukia to tame the spirit turtle, to which Rick agreed, but no matter how hard Yukia thought about it, this was a task even more difficult than taming 100 dragons. Channel shared her views that if anyone could do this task, it was definitely her brother Yukia, and she believed this was a golden opportunity to significantly enhance his abilities as well by taming strong monsters like that. Yukia figured if he tamed the spirit turtle, it would not only become a part of his arsenal, but he would also gain strength himself due to taming. Rick didn't dislike the sound of it, and he thought it would be more convenient for them, since taming that divine beast would solve both the issue of increasing Yukia's forces, and secondly the problem for Elf Nation would be solved, making it a win-win situation for both parties. Rin truly believed Yukia could do it. Yukia was giving it a thought, but then Rick stood up and told Yukia to let him know what his response was. Yukia immediately replied he would like to give it a try, and as an impatient person, Rick liked how quickly Yukia came to that decision. Yukia showed a kind smile, saying he already needed help in increasing his strength to fend off his pursuers, and as allies, or more like as friends, it was only natural for him to lend a hand to Rick. Rick found Yukia quite dependable and felt reassured since Yukia had even earned the faith of Fairy Rarin. Now, Yukia stood up to head out right now and asked Rick how far was the World Tree from here. Rick answered that if Yukia managed to handle the Pegasus, it would take them less than a half-day to arrive there. It was Yukia's first time seeing a Pegasus, and being given reassurance how fast they could travel with this flying creature, Yukia wished to try his best on it. Rick was completely fine with it, and he was generous enough to give this Pegasus to Yukia. But then Adori, one of the elves under Rick, sighed and remarked there was no way a mere human could ride a Pegasus. Rick got furious as he deemed those words of Adori as an insult to his friend, and Adori immediately fell into a rain of apologies coming out of his mouth. Yukia chuckled at the sight of Rick treating even his family strictly, and that aside Rick apologized for the inconvenience caused to Yukia. Yukia didn't mind it at all, and he went to gratefully accept the Pegasus as he used his tame skill on it. In an instant after taming, the Pegasus began treating Yukia warmly, and this sight left Adori really surprised. Rick chuckled, mentioning it seems like Adori has been outpaced, since even as a tamer himself, Adori hasn't managed to tame Pegasus yet. Yukia was surprised to see Adori trembling over there, and he figured it must be because the reality that a human surpassed him must have hit him hard. But to his surprise, Adori completely changed into having a glimmer in his eyes in admiration for Yukia, and he even called Yukia as his big brother all of a sudden. Adori truly apologized for mocking Yukia before, and Rick mentioned he never doubted Yukia's ability. He told Yukia that he seemed to have a knack for charming spirits as well, since Adori was actually a half-elf, half-spirit, and he also became passionate towards Yukia just like Rin. Yukia's jaw dropped as he never noticed when it happened, and suddenly Rin began acting all flustered as she hid behind a tree with a blushing red face. Rick had high hopes for Yukia, as he was already wonderfully making changes around, which only made him more sure that they should hurry up and solve the matter with the divine turtle. Meanwhile, Channel was looking from a distance, because the situation from her eyes was that all the elves, including Rick, and even that Pegasus, were all admiring Yukia way too much. She went on and asked Yukia to take her with him, But Yukiya asked her to stay here because there was someone needed to stay here to control the creatures Yukiya tamed before. She understood his reasoning, and then Rick asked Yukiya if it would be okay with him if Idori and his sister Rin stayed here with Shano. Yukiya was fine as long as they were, and it seemed he didn't need any confirmation as Idori somehow had a lot of admiration for Yukiya, while Rin was just easygoing. Yukiya told Shano to make sure to keep good care of their guests, and after accepting that, Shano then wished for him to take care along the way and come back safe and sound. Yukiya saw she was worried, and he assured her with a pat on the head that he got it, after which Yukiya left on Pegasus along with the other elves. Above, Rick modestly hoped that he didn't cause much trouble for Yukiya's little sister, to which Yukiya replied it couldn't be helped but for her to worry since Yukiya could be a little unreliable at times. Aside from that, he remarked Shano was a capable and clever girl, so he was sure she would work hard while he would be away and make sure to create a heaven for everyone including elves. Rick was grateful for that and hoped that one day the people of soon-to-be Rainforest Nation and elves would have a friendly enough nature towards each other to be able to move freely between the nations. Yukiya looked at Rick with some intent, and when Rick asked him what was up, Yukiya replied that Rick doesn't look very elf-like as he expected elves to be. Rick stated that elves could be open-minded to allow more free conversations, and other than that he himself feels like he has fallen under Yukiya's charm, making him more open with Yukiya. Yukiya wondered if his attraction as a tamer works on half-elf and half-spirits only, to which Rick's servant Retinue responded by stating that their king Rick was actually a pure-breed elf. Rick called Retinue as grandfather, hearing which Yukiya was a bit surprised, but then Rick explained that Retinue was just his loyal butler, and he was old enough for Rick to call him his grandfather. Retinue stayed silent, allowing Rick to speak without being interrupted, as Rick continued to state that Retinue and other attendants were just ordinary elves from their nation without a mixed breed. Yukiya was curious to know more about this land where elves reside, then Rick mentioned they would arrive there ahead of schedule if they go a little faster. Thus, after going into faster speed, Rick soon pointed out at the World Tree when it was in sight and said they were near their destination. However, Yukiya couldn't comprehend where to enter an elf nation, to which Rick replied they would just charge right in the tree. Yukiya was shocked upon hearing that charging would only lead them to hit the tree and fall, but even so Rick kept them going straight, and unexpectedly, Yukiya passed through the World Tree. He looked around wondering how they slipped right through the tree, and Rick told him that being able to pass through this tree means he was blessed by the spirits. Yukiya looked up and was awestruck by the sight in front of him, as Rick warmly welcomed him to the land of the elves, Yggdrasil. The whole elf nation turned out to be actually living inside the World Tree itself. It was truly a wonderful place, and Rick informed him that the royal palace was located on the top of this area, and it was where the Council of Elders reside. Other than that, Rick pointed out a gateway and said it was where the spirit turtle was sealed. Yukiya could feel the powerful aura of the spirit turtle from this far, and Rick brought up the emergence of this matter that the seal on the spirit turtle was about to break within a few years, and if that happened it would be the end of Elf Nation. Yukiya decided to set off right away towards the problem, and so Rick instructed Retinue to quickly summon 5 elite warriors to escort Yukiya. However, the butler Retinue had already prepared the team, knowing full well what his master would want, and this sight reminded Yukiya of his butler Robin. Then Retinue noticed Rick seemed to be going as well and asked about it, to which Rick replied he was indeed going, since he couldn't let his comrades be the only one bearing the risk of this mission. Retinue suggested he should leave this to the elite squad, but Rick refused it right away. An elf from the elite squad named Jinto asked His Majesty Rick if he doesn't trust them, and Rick said that was obvious since they took quite a long time on their last mission. Jinto excused himself, saying it was just 30 years, and Retinue also believed 30 years wasn't that long of a time to worry about as an elf. But for Yukiya it was indeed a worrying thing, and Rick knew that as well, so he didn't want to waste 30 years of Yukiya's life like that. Thus it was very important for Rick to go with Yukiya right away, part of his reason being his impatient nature. Retinue understood there was no helping it now that Lord Rick was like this, so he ordered the elite elves to stop Rick here since they couldn't afford to risk his life by sending him to a dangerous mission. Rick told Yukiya he couldn't handle this many people on his own, and moreover, these elite elves were actually pride warriors of their nation who have driven off ferocious beasts that dared to invade their lands. Yukiya asked Rick if he was going to surrender in front of them in that case. Then Rick proposed some stupid idea that may or may not work. After listening to it, Yukiya asked Rick if he was serious about this idea, and Rick assured he was not joking about it. Then Jinto was about to charge forward to surround Rick, and that was when Yukiya prepared to execute Rick's plan, and he used his tame spell on Rick. Suddenly, Rick became stronger with the tame effects, and he charged towards Ginto at an unbelievably fast speed, and to Ginto's surprise, Rick went right past him while managing to break his sword in the blink of an eye. Then the archer rained down a bunch of arrows on Rick, but he effortlessly dodged them all and placed his hand on the ground to cast a natural magic attack. The elites were caught off guard as they suddenly got tied from the tree branches that growed out of ground. The swordsman elf was amazed by Rick's abilities, but he also needed to stop Rick for his sake, so he charged in to strike Rick with the intention of only stopping him. But Rick dodged the attack by retreating a few steps and then jumping right above the swordsman, then casted light magic lasers to tire out the swordsman with minimal damage. Rick successfully managed to win over the elite squad, and while he was trapping them to sort things out, his butler retinue tried to cast a magic spell from behind Yukiya, and Yukiya quickly stalked him by taking a hold of his hand. He told retinue there was no way he would let him waste efforts of Rick, after which Rick came and told retinue it was enough, and he should go and relay his message to the Council of Elders that the hero of human realm has awakened, and now the Elf King Rick and the Divine Beast Spirit Turtle now serve under Yukiya. And since the Divine Beast matter would be solved, the Elves would finally attain true freedom after so many years of struggle. Retinue had a sharp look, seeing which Rick asked him if he was still unconvinced. Rick figured there was no way to convince retinue, so he just carried Yukiya to charge straight for the pathway to the Spirit Turtle. Retinue was too surprised, and he couldn't even react to stop the fast-running Rick, who left this order for retinue to make sure to pass on his message to the elders. Retinue pinched his forehead understanding his orders, while feeling worried for Rick. Later in the pathway, Yukiya asked Rick if it was okay for him to pass on the message that things were sorted even before they started the mission. Rick stated it was completely fine since even the message would take like a week to reach the elders, and by then they would have already dealt with this. Yukiya was again dazzled by the speed of elves doing things so slowly. Rick added that even if retinue managed to make the message arrive earlier, he wasn't worried about it because he had faith in Yukiya's power. He was counting on Yukiya, and Yukiya reassured him back to do his best. After that, they encountered many monsters, but Yukiya tamed them all and turned them into his allies in this journey into the forest. Rick was impressed with Yukiya's abilities coming in so handy, because coming here was usually difficult because of so many monsters. Yukiya mentioned it wouldn't be any problem now, and he feels quite stronger after taming Rick as well. However, he was concerned if this kept going on, Yukiya might as well be etched in history as the legendary demon who brainwashed the Elf King. Rick laughed on his statement and remarked it was fine since he agreed to do this out of his choice, which also made him significantly stronger than before. Nonetheless, he wouldn't mind Yukiya to be stronger since he needs to be strong to tame spirit turtles as well. They further walked in, and after some time, they stopped as Yukiya sensed something alarming up ahead like a powerful aura coming from deep within a chamber-like place, beyond which it was a spirit turtle that awaits them. Yukiya prepared himself to cross the door leading to the chamber with the spirit turtle, and Rick figured Yukiya seemed to be already guided in there since he didn't need to be in need of being directed. It was when Yukiya's eyes fell upon a huge eye the size of his own body, and it turned out to belong to the spirit turtle. It looked really ancient from one glance, and the spirit turtle had a huge tree on its back like the legends. Yukiya found this truly pressurizing even with his strength against the formidable presence of spirit turtles. Meanwhile, at the base where Channel was, there were more houses in the area, while she was wondering if her brother was okay wherever he went off to. Her worries made her think she should have gone with him after all, and then she noticed a bird coming with a letter addressed to her brother. The letter was sent from Lady Milia, containing her current heartfelt sentiments towards Yukiya with a certain request. Meanwhile, the divine beast spirit turtle was more colossal than Yukiya imagined from the legends. Then Rick asked him if he was up for this task. Yukiya said he would know only after giving it a try, so he went forward with keeping in mind that taming a monster was like a contract, so Yukiya first needed to see if there was anything the divine beast would want from tame. With this, Yukiya casted the tame magic on the spirit turtle, and suddenly he began to feel a heavy headache. Yukiya fell on his knees with the pressure. Rick quickly went to ask him if he was okay. Yukiya claimed he just needed to catch his breath for a moment, and when Rick asked what was going on, Yukiya replied that the memories of the ancient spirit turtle were flooding his mind with thousands of years of history. Yukiya saw that the spirit turtle in the past was born as a divine beast, and he stood watch over all living beings as a guardian. It liked living in harmony with other animals and humans, but eventually a time arrived when humans and demi-humans developed their civilizations, and they soon enough came to see the spirit turtle as a threat because of its size. The spirit turtle chose to retreat peacefully in response, yet even its movements were very dangerous, which inflicted damage wherever it stepped despite the turtle not wanting to cause harm. And ultimately, it was sealed away by the elf king of that time, who possessed unparalleled magical prowess. Rick asked Yukiya if the spirit turtle had come to harbor any resentment towards humans and elves, to which Yukiya replied in disagreement and said the spirit turtle had only one desire: to have a body that could walk around freely without causing harm to anyone. Yukiya came to learn that the spirit turtle got a kind heart, after which he told the spirit turtle that he could grant that wish of his with his power of taming by turning the turtle into a small spirit. Rick asked Yukiya if he was talking about spirit transformation, and Yukiya agreed that was it, since he had realized before that even the normal goblins he tamed before were evolved into hobgoblins with more strength and better intelligence. Thus Yukiya believed if it was the spirit turtle, which was a powerful divine beast, it would be more effortless to transform his form however Yukiya wished to with his tame. Yukiya held his head due to ache, and he was also feeling guilty for not realizing his potential to transform others before. Rick asked how was his health, to which Yukiya replied it was just a little off for now, but he was okay, and more than anything, he wished to have the spirit turtle join him even more than just his sake. He really wanted to set the spirit turtle free, so Yukiya looked at the spirit turtle with genuinely pure intentions, and Rick admired this part of him ever since he met Yukiya. Rick took out a healing potion he brought in advance for a time like this, and informed Yukiya he would feel a bit better after having it. Yukiya drank the potion and felt really refreshing from its effect. Now he went to the spirit turtle with a smile, while Rick was watching him in admiration for not just his taming abilities, but also for his respect and compassion for monsters and animals he tamed, who did the same for Yukiya as well. It was precisely because of those qualities that Yukiya managed to tame so many monsters and earn their respect as well. Rick supposed he couldn't help but be drawn to Yukiya himself as well, and now Yukiya was all ready for another try at taming the spirit turtle. He focused his magic deeply with eyes closed, while Rick was confidently looking over him from behind. Rick was glad that he brought Yukiya here, and now Yukiya finished focusing and casted his taming skill on the spirit turtle. After some time, at Channel's place, she noticed there was something in the sky and recognized it was actually her brother Yukiya returning on Pegasus, with Rick following behind. Yukiya greeted Channel upon his return, and when she asked what happened to the spirit turtle, Yukiya put forward a flying little turtle with a plant on its back. Yukiya stated it was actually the spirit turtle, and Channel didn't even doubt it and felt even more surprised that even divine beasts could be tamed by his brother so easily. Yukiya couldn't say anything here since it was true, and that aside, he asked her how the progress of their base was. Channel recalled something and told Yukiya a letter came for him last night from Lady Milia, and after reading the contents in it, Yukiya heard of Milia's report that ever since Yukiya left, the creatures of Palace have been treated unjustly, as the caretakers have been neglecting in their duties, and even resorting to violence on the poor creatures. And it was not long left when Yukiya's taming influence would fade away and the creatures would stop listening. Yukiya understood this situation would soon become a chaos if the creatures went on rampage, and since Milia was aware that their kingdom didn't have anyone that could save their kingdom against dragons, she requested Yukiya to come and save their kingdom. She assured Yukiya that that would change her father's mind about him and welcome him properly. Rick also read the letter and remarked it was a truly selfish request in the letter, but Yukiya saw it as only her being in a tight spot. Channel asked Yukiya what were they going to do now, to which Yukiya replied that he had been treated well by Lady Milia in the past, so he couldn't ignore her, and moreover he was also worried about the remaining creatures there. He looked up in the sky hoping she was safe and sound. But there in the kingdom of Zeals, the royal palace and the whole city was in chaos as all the tamed creatures were running wild. The soldiers couldn't understand why they were having to fight their very own monsters in the royal palace, and the need for medics rose with increase in injuries. In the middle of all this, there was Elaine, who was scratching his head while blaming it all on Yukiya, and even if it was Elaine's own incompetence, Elaine exclaimed it must be Yukiya, who was controlling all these creatures to rampage around the palace. Then head of finance Bitter came and agreed Elaine was right, and seeing Bitter here, Elaine straightened his back to greet the Lord Bitter, and then Bitter declared Yukiya Rainforest was behind all this and he was the real troublemaker. Elaine sweetly talked and just agreed Bitter was all right about that, and Yukiya must be doing this to get revenge for being kicked out of the palace. Then Bitter decided to assign one task to Elaine, and Elaine was ready to do whatever Bitter would ask of him. Thus Bitter ordered Elaine to bring back Yukia Rainforce, which only shocked Elaine, and seeing his face, Bitter assured Elaine he wasn't intending to snatch away his role but to make Yukia shoulder the blame for this chaos. Elaine agreed to obey the command right away, and Bitter stated if he understood the tasks then he better get going with the help of one dragon, since he was a tamer after all. But Elaine made a cornered look, which made Bitter mad, but he couldn't do anything else now, so he just asked Elaine to at least handle a horse and head to the northern woods to get Yukia back. Elaine bowed down, taking upon this task, and immediately ran away to head out for the north. Meanwhile, Bitter was pissed off at just how incompetent Elaine was, as he couldn't even handle the task of dealing with even one dragon. He wandered forward and backwards in tension because since he was the one who pushed for Yukia to be kicked out, Bitter would inevitably face a demotion, and it wouldn't be too stretched to think of a possible death sentence. He wanted to make everyone believe that this chaos was all caused by Yukia no matter what. While Bitter was lost in planning something, the Princess Milia saw him from behind and understood there was a trap being set for Yukia. After a few days, Yukia was in the middle of checking out his tamed monsters while some of them were in the middle of their work. Yukia was glad that the monsters he tamed in the land of elves were happily living here as well, but in the middle of this he still seemed to be stressed about something. Chanel asked him if there was something troubling him, to which he replied that it had been a while since he got kicked out and the creatures at Royal Palace must be treated rough until now. Suddenly, Yukia sensed alarming sounds from the woods, and after heading there with Chanel, Yukia found out there was an outsider in his area. That invader turned out to be none other than Elaine, who was shouting at all the goblins, stopping him from advancing any further. Elaine was yelling at the goblins to stay away, and that was when Yukia recognized him and called out his name. Rick asked Yukia who was that man, to which Yukia replied he was the current caretaker of the Royal Palace Familiars. When Elaine saw Yukia, he shouted that he had been searching for the sinner Yukia, but hearing him addressing Yukia disrespectfully, the goblins became angry and they attacked Elaine's horse and made Elaine fall down from it. Elaine groaned he was currently an envoy of the kingdom and won't let this slip away. Yukia stepped forward and Elaine quickly shouted that he came here to bring him back for judgment, as he accused it was because of Yukia that the whole kingdom was in utter chaos right now. He threatened Yukia won't be treated softly for this crime, but on his consideration if Yukia were to present that cute elf behind him, referring to Rin, Elaine could be considerate towards Elaine. Suddenly, Elaine felt the air around him becoming heavy, and the source of this pressure was the elf king Rick, who didn't want to waste any time and directly cut the head of Elaine and send it back where he came from. Elaine was terrified upon hearing this threat. Then Yukia told Rick they can just ignore this guy, and more importantly, he was wishing to meet the old familiars he used to care for. Rick figured it would be better to just go save Yukia's familiars in that case rather than the people of the kingdom. Chanel understood Yukia was heading back to the kingdom, and he assured her he would be fine and bring back everyone else with him as well. When he was about to leave, Rick said he would join Yukia as well, and his sister Rin tried to tell that Rick might be scolded by the butler retinue again if he just went like this. Rick reasoned it was fine since there were already a million of things retinue would scold him for, so adding one more won't make a difference, just like how he came here on his own. And besides, he knows he wouldn't be in danger since they have the divine beast, the spirit turtle, with them. Elaine came to check after hearing of the divine beast, and he refused to believe they even exist, let alone this turtle was one of them. He mocked Yukia's sister for believing such a dumb thing, proving she was just as lame as her brother. Yukia was about to lose his temper, and suddenly Rick went and held Elaine by the chin to warn him to mind his words in front of Yukia. Yukia quickly asked Rick to let go of Elaine, and he didn't have to go too far. Yukia was obviously still mad because Elaine mocked his sister, hearing which Chanel got happy, while Elaine was even more pissed off and told them that he would surely make Yukia's land pay for their rudeness. Rick suggested it was probably the best choice to sever Elaine's head in that case, and while keeping him under leash, they immediately set out to the kingdom of Zeals on Pegasus. Upon arriving there, Yukia was surprised because the situation of the royal palace seemed way worse than he imagined, with half the castle being destroyed, the buildings and some homes of civilians in rubble. Rick asked if this ruin-like place was even functioning as a nation. Then Elaine expressed his shock, because when he left the royal palace to get Yukia there was hardly any damage, but now it was just devastated. Yukia observed the surroundings and found it lucky to see there were no corpses of any humans or monsters here. Then he sensed something, and Rick informed Yukia that something was nearby and approaching them right now. It was when dozens of creatures which used to be the royal palace familiars appeared, all angry. But suddenly, after looking at Yukiya, they became calm and cheerful, as if they never rampaged. Yukiya greeted them saying it has been a while, and judging by the way these creatures acted towards Yukiya, Rick understood these were Yukiya's loyal creatures. Yukiya modestly said most of them were tamed long before his time, so he has only been taking care of them actually. But despite that, Rick could see these creatures had become quite fond of him. Then Yukiya got called out by someone, and the person turned out to be the Princess Milia. Yukiya was glad to see her safe, and Milia replied she was actually protected by Petra, the white dragon. Yukiya was glad as Milia seemed to have managed to tame a dragon, and more importantly, both of them were safe. At that time, Manes came while pushing aside Princess Milia and praised his son for doing well by bringing Yukiya Rainforce back. Yukiya recognized Manes at first glance, then Elaine took cover behind his father and told him Yukiya was clearly the mastermind behind this rampage of monsters, and they even got quiet now that he came here. Yukiya stated it was Elaine and others who had been negligent, but the clever Manes who knew that went to Yukiya and still pinned the blame on him, then asked how he was planning to take responsibility. Rick pushed back Manes and asked if the king was around, and this attitude of his made Manes lose his nerves and shout at him. But his jaw was dropped when he noticed Rick was an elf, while Rick warned Manes that wasting his time was not something to be taken lightly, especially now that he had come here as a mediator. He wouldn't overlook any act of rudeness towards Yukiya, otherwise Manes and his nation would face consequences. Yukiya understood Rick was planning to sort this matter out like a post-war settlement between nations, but the things only worsened as Bitter appeared there and said King don't need to step in matters like this, since it was a matter of their nation, as the tamer who served in court have turned against their country. Rick called all of his words ridiculous, and Yukiya spoke up how he could still be thought of as a citizen of Zeals after being exiled, and even if he still decided to come here due to a call for help, he had no reason to be blamed instead. Bitter exclaimed that they were utter lies, and Yukiya was definitely the one who caused all this chaos wreaked upon the palace, and Bitter pointed out the clear proof of that was how docile the creatures were now behaving around Yukiya. Bitter accused Yukiya was just now an enemy given the situation, after hearing Yukiya replied that after his exile from the nation, his bonds with the creatures were already severed, and if only they had cared for the beasts properly, they wouldn't be causing such chaos right now. Bitter refused to hear Yukiya out, and now even Yukiya was tired of all this. Thus, since he was already being accused of rebelling against the kingdom, he thought of might as well doing it as he transformed the spirit turtle to its original form. Suddenly, the huge spirit turtle of the legends appeared before the royal palace of Zeals, and its immensely huge body scared off Manes and Bitter to their cores. And it was not just the spirit turtle but many other ferocious beasts standing beside Yukiya, and he declared that he was considering letting these beasts run wild for a bit. Bitter inevitably shouted in fear why a calamity such as a spirit turtle was lurking over here, but even in the midst of such a terrifying situation, Elaine hesitantly opened his mouth, mocking Yukiya could never in his life be accompanied by a real divine beast, and this might just be an illusion. It was when the spirit turtle unleashed an intense pressure of magic on Bitter and others which made it hard for them not just to stand but even breathe properly. Manes and Bitter tried to shout, desperately grasping for air, along with the fear of frozen Elaine. Then Yukiya demanded that he wished to speak with the king, and if that didn't happen then he would set all the monsters behind him free right here. Bitter knew they were the ones at disadvantage, but it turned out the king already came here on his own volition. King asked Yukiya to kindly call back those monsters or else this kingdom would crumble. Yukiya noticed the king was looking pretty frail and worn out compared to before. Then he asked the spirit turtle to stop. Bitter quickly fell free, and he quickly went to the king and tried to justify whatever happened. But the king was well aware now that he was mistaken to cast Yukiya aside, and these words left no space for Bitter to argue. King walked towards Yukiya and went on to request if he would consider serving under the king once more for the sake of this kingdom. But to King's shock, Yukiya refused it right away because now he had an important position to fill in his own land. The king sighed, and not wanting to suffer losses, he requested Yukiya to forge an alliance with them. Bitter intervened, asking the king to reconsider that. Then the king ordered knights to shut him up and capture Manes, Elaine, and Bitter. The king stated that he had found out about these three plotting against Yukiya, after which they had also embezzled the royal funds. Mane's face twitched into fear, knowing fully well this was the end for him, whereas Bitter had a sharp glare at Yukiya and warned him that he won't let this slide. The soldier tightened his ropes and told him to keep walking quietly. Now with the nuisances gone, King approached Yukiya again of their alliance. Ukiah asked for details on what he meant by that. Then the king explained that he now wished to recognize Ukiah as a nation and build a relationship of mutual alliance formed by friendship between their lands, and the king also offered the title of a duke to Ukiah. Ukiah wasn't pleased by this proposal, and then Rick spoke in his place by calling the king stupid to still be looking down on Ukiah, even if the king was the one in dire circumstances here. Rick asked the king if he didn't care if his whole royal family were to be executed because of his actions, and these words of his tensed Milia, and it was when the Chancellor Harble spoke up saying Ukiah seemed to not want to resort to any violence, so he asked if they could consider this incident as just some government authorities plotting crime against Ukiah and solve it that way. Ukiah told them they could do whatever they want, but he made sure to let them know he would do the same in response to their actions. King knew he must act very carefully on his actions now, and that was when Milia stepped forward to suggest if it would suffice Ukiah. She, as the princess, proposed to be a hostage to ensure the kingdom's bad actions were understood as their fault by the king. And while she would be held as hostage, their countries could have an alliance, and if the kingdom ever commits to doing any wrongdoings against Ukiah again, she won't mind if Ukiah sends back her head as Kingdom of Zeal's punishment. The king tried to keep Milia from saying anything reckless, but she was determined about what she said, and Rick, on the other hand, also thought it wasn't a bad proposal, and they might consider treating each other as supporting allies while Milia being held as hostage. Ukiah gave it a thought, as this was not a bad deal, but he wasn't sure if the promise would still be kept because for this kingdom, Milia even as a hostage won't change anything. Harble considered that and asked King what does he think, to which the king was about to nod in agreement. But then Ukiah thought of how less Milia means to the king, because of which he changed the condition and said if there was any suspicious activity, then instead of Milia's head, he would rather send the march of the spirit turtle along with thousands of other magical beasts. Hearing this made the king know his place, and he immediately accepted this condition of Ukiah out of fear. Later on, King was in his court and he asked the military general how he saw their current situation, and if there was any way for them to turn this around. The general anxiously replied that without a lie it was clear that the difference in their strength and Ukiah's strength was too great, so they should instead recognize Ukiah as a mighty nation in the north. The king couldn't feel any worse now that this new adversary even holds a grudge against them. Aside from that, General suggested they should right now focus on rebuilding the broken structures and also bolster their lost forces simultaneously. The king was in utmost stress because after what happened just now, the public opinion was going out of their control, thus the matter of Rainforest family couldn't be hidden any longer. King then asked Harble what nation does he think would be better for them to alliance with for recovering their damages, to which Harble suggested they should set aside all the emotional aspects, because right now siding with Ukiah was undoubtedly their best choice. The king knew that was probably it, and thus the decision was made to do what Ukiah asks of them. Meanwhile, Ukiah and Rick were returning on Pegasus along with Princess Milia. Rick broke the silence asking Ukiah more about that nation. Then Ukiah described that kingdom was actually bordered by multiple nations, except for North, where it was embraced by lush forests and towering mountains. He further stated that until now, they have built their power through military might, with the main forces being dragon knights and the mounted monstrosities. And now he has meticulously gathered every last of the kingdom's strong tamed monsters, which means the kingdom is doomed now. Rick spoke up that it would be easy for them to take over this kingdom if they ran out of military and supplies. Ukiah stated he wasn't thinking about it because he wanted to take over this kingdom right now, just sending a single dragon would suffice for that. But his reckless action could give the neighboring countries a reason to unite against him, so rather than that, Rick understood Ukiah was waiting until the kingdom collapsed on its own. Ukiah agreed with that, and then Rick asked him about their next course of plan. Ukiah declared that he wishes to create a place where exceptional talent would gather, for which they need to expand their territory to open up new opportunities for them. Later, when they arrived at Ukiah's land, Milia was surprised to see Ukiah's very own country he formed in such a short time. Channel came rushing to welcome her brother and ask how it was. Ukiah answered they should now begin developing resources to support the kingdom and establish their trade routes through the kingdom since they have now entered an alliance. Channel heard him and then checked all the magical beasts were safely brought back. However, with the royal palace familiars vanishing, the kingdom must now be in peril. It was when her eyes fell on Princess Milia, and Channel immediately went to greet Milia as the princess with utmost formalities. Milia requested her to stop it, and she greeted Channel and told her not to worry about her, since she was also aware that her nation Zeals had no future with its current rulers, And other than that, Milia told Channel she didn't have to use honorifics to her, since she was just a hostage after all. Channel was confused upon hearing that. Then Milia stated it was hard to say she valued anything even as a hostage, since she had been scorned as useless by the castle folk and her older siblings alike, so she preferred Channel to just treat her as plain old Milia. She would appreciate that. Ukiya intervened, but he didn't have much to say, so he just left Milia under care of Channel since they were both girls. Channel was surprised by how suddenly he just dropped a responsibility on her, but setting aside her surprise, Ukiya just walked away telling Milia that she was free to roam free wherever she liked and asked Rin to befriend Milia as well. Channel tried to talk to Ukiya, but he just ran away because he was nervous as to how to handle girls of Milia's age. Meanwhile, Channel was feeling more shy than ever, and she mustered up courage to call Milia by her name, but ended up adding Your Highness next to it out of habit. Milia told her she doesn't have to add Your Grace, and the same time another person joined them in. Channel saw it was her mother, and Charla said she had heard about Milia from Ukiya, and wondered if it was truly okay to treat Milia as just a girl instead of a princess. Milia nervously greeted Ukiya's mother and stated she was grateful to be under her care from now on. Charla told her there was no need to be so formal. Then Charla got called out by one of her familiars who wanted to show her that they and others have finished making a piece of cloth she wanted. Milia was super amazed to see Charla have applied fashion techniques to even monsters, while Charla asserted it was really amazing how everyone was doing so well. Milia was sure that Charla's amazing taming must have something to do with her being from Rainforest family. And it wasn't just Charla, but even Sham had also tamed hundreds of monsters herself. And lastly, there was Ukiya, who was just on a whole another level of taming, and with the subjects Ukiya commands right now, he could truly become the king of this whole land without any trouble. She feels like she have stumbled into quite a remarkable place, and Rick agreed with her on that. Milia formally greeted the elf king Rick, and he told her there was no need to be so formal around him since they were both royalty. Milia doubted she could be called royalty in her current state. Then Rick suggested her that since her homeland kingdom of Zeals was going to fall sooner or later, Milia could simply marry into Rainforest family. Milia was caught off guard by such a remark, while Rick figured if she were to marry Ukiya, she could always call herself royalty without a second thought. It was when Rick's sister, Rin, showed up there, and she was very shy while approaching Milia already, and now she heard Rick talking about Ukiya's marriage. She kind of liked Ukiya, but here her brother was making remarks on his possible partner, while Ukiya had asked Rin to be friendly with the same possible partner. Still keeping that aside, she offered Milia to guide her around their headquarters for now, and Milia was grateful for that. Sharva looked over the girls and was sure it was bound to get even livelier from now on. Later on, Ukiya was planning with Rick where they should begin development next. Then Rick suggested they should bring some folks over from his country to help out with hunting, farming, and military for now. Ukiya knew it would be beneficial, but he asked if there was any benefit for Rick in this. Rick nodded and explained that elves have really long lives, so they were surely talented in various skills along with knowing how to be responsible. Thus putting someone responsible in a position would tremendously help Ukiya, and it would also make those elves feel something new instead of being bored at home. So it was good for both sides, and their elves would have no special requirements either. Rick could also be at ease in his land, knowing there were capable subordinates of his helping out Ukiya. Ukiya knew he was getting a lot from Rick, and mentioned that he does not have much faith in his abilities other than taming. Rick assured Ukiya to think of Rick as his guiding spirit for that purpose, and other than him, Rin would also be here, and she was really good on how to read a situation and come up with solutions. Ukiya figured that since he could only tame, he needed to rely on everyone around him for other things. Now Rick put up another proposal for Ukiya, that there were some more possible talents to bring into the country, who might be capable in things even elves couldn't help. From the mention of it, Ukiya deduced the only thing that elves couldn't do would be civil engineering like making houses. Rick agreed with that and said the main reason for it was because the elves lived inside the world tree. Now that aside, Rick stated that he knows of perfect people who could help out with the construction requirements, so they should go and strike a deal with them. Ukiya asked who could that be, and Rick mentioned it would be the dwarves, as the country of dwarves boasted the finest blacksmithing skills on the continent. Ukiya thought it was harder than said, since he had only seen the dwarves' race in stories. Moreover, the negotiating part was just unknown to him. Rick told him the good news that all of it was easy, since dwarves were actually one of their allied nations already, and in reality they were a cheerful and friendly race, thus things should go smoothly enough for them. Meanwhile, in the land of dwarves, the dwarves seemed to be troubled as the forges were barely burning and the lack of fire had become a major concern for them. They felt annoyed and pissed because with just a spark they couldn't even forge a thing, while others were just trying to drown their sorrows in a drink. Then a dwarf turned to ask their king if he was going to do something about this. The king of dwarves chucked down some meat and drink first out of frustration, and then he began cursing a foolish bird, which seemed to be the one troubling them. After that, Yukiya and Rick traveled all the way in dragons to the land of dwarves. Yukiya was amazed when he was introduced to the cave where dwarves lived, and inside there were dwarves everywhere he looked. The dwarves were all cheerful and holding trades, or sales of goods and foods, with an overall lively spectacle. Then Yukiya heard sounds of some dwarves calling Rick amazing, and they began cheering for him as a welcome. Yukiya noticed Rick seemed to be quite influential here among the dwarves, and after a while they reached a caveway guarded by some dwarves. They let Rick pass by easily, and Yukiya asked him why the dwarves were so friendly with him. Rick stated it was because they have been allies for over a century by now, and he hoped that Yukiya would also have a long-lasting relationship with the dwarves as a ruler of the land. They entered the place which was actually the king of dwarves' residence, and soon Rick and Yukiya met the king of dwarves who greeted them, and introduced himself to Yukiya as the dwarf king Kaiser. Rick greeted back saying it had been a while they had met, while Kaiser remarked Rick doesn't seem to have changed at all, whereas in comparison Kaiser himself feels quite diminished. Rick chuckled at Kaiser, joking as always just like the time they met 100 years ago, and that aside he came to the main matter without wasting any time. Kaiser prepared to hear out Rick, and he figured that the request might actually be from the human friend Rick brought along. Kaiser gave a thoughtful look at Yukiya, which made Yukiya quite nervous, but suddenly to his surprise, Kaiser began laughing, saying Yukiya seemed to be a nice person and told him to say what was his request. Yukiya flinched as he hadn't even said a word yet, to which Kaiser replied that he didn't mind hearing out since there doesn't seem to be anything Yukiya could harm them with. Thus, now that it was decided that Yukiya was their guest, Kaiser announced there would be a celebration for their guests Rick and Yukiya. Other dwarves immediately joined and brought over food and drinks needed for the celebration. Rick smiled as he was familiar with this sight, and it was just like Kaiser to welcome his guests with great hospitality. During the celebration, they talked about the matter of Yukiya needing some dwarves for civil engineering and blacksmithing. Kaiser figured it would be great for Yukiya to have some of the young dwarves, which would be perfect for him, and they would also last until they were 200 years old. Yukiya thanked for the generous understanding of Kaiser and asked what he could offer to him in return. Kaiser didn't really need anything, but since Yukiya was living in the forest, he asked for some wood to be traded. Yukiya was fine with this request, while Rick found this request of Kaiser odd since this area was already rich enough to have many ways to source a fire for a furnace. Kaiser informed him that their cave was once cherished by the fire spirit, because of which they never needed much timber until now. Rick asked him if they angered the fire spirit to be in trouble like this, to which Kaiser angrily yelled that it wasn't him who provoked the fire spirit bird, and it was just acting up for no reason. Kaiser wished if only this matter with the fire bird gets sorted, he would be back in forge in no time. The young dwarves, which were actually just 100 years old, stood up and boasted how they could make so many things once the forge issue gets solved. Another guy mocked him, saying he looked like a 200-year-old instead, which caused the other dwarf to challenge him to a drink battle to see who was younger and more energetic. The booze began to be brought quickly for the battle, and while they were going at it, Yukiya asked Kaiser who was this fire spirit. Rick told him it must be the divine fire spirit Phoenix they were talking about, and hearing about another divine spirit caught Yukiya's curiosity. Kaiser asked Yukiya if he could handle the matter, but instead of Yukiya, Rick spoke up saying Yukiya could easily do it. The dwarf king bursted into laughter and said they should celebrate this occasion with some fireworks once it's solved, and even after that he would regularly keep sending artisanal goods, weapons, and armor to Yukiya as his gratitude. Yukiya tried to tell Rick his taming might have worked on Spirit Turtle only because it was sealed. Then in response Rick said even if that were the case, Yukiya now had the power of Spirit Turtle, so everything should be fine now. Yukiya figured there was no helping it, and Rick wasn't wrong here as he looked at the turtle. Later they went to the mountains where the Phoenix resided, and after reaching here on foot, Rick informed Yukiya they were close to Phoenix Lair. Yukiya, however, was extremely tired and sweating after walking so far. Rick wished they could have come upon the dragon by flying here, but it wasn't possible since the dragon was too scared to come here once it felt the aura of Phoenix. Rick mentioned the Phoenix must be in a pretty foul mood to be daunting to others so much, and knowing that, Yukiya asked Rick how come he accepted this request of Kaiser so quickly. Rick stated that he had no intention of being spiteful, but it was just that he believed in Yukiya's power with all his heart. Yukiya was flustered upon hearing there, and ahead both of them noticed it was the end of mountains and the start of volcanic range. Yukiya was sweating a lot due to the heat, and he asked Rick how come he was looking all cool even in this temperature. Rick replied that since he was a high elf, he naturally adapts to his surroundings and it was no big deal. Yukiya then asked the spirit turtle to help him out, and so the spirit turtle went up and casted a defensive magic on both Rick and Yukiya. Yukiya now didn't feel even a tiny bit of heat, and Rick expected a divine beast to be this powerful for a reason, especially the guardian beast spirit turtle. Yukiya thanked the spirit turtle for the super helpful barrier. Then suddenly the sky-wrenching roars of Phoenix echoed in the whole area, causing earthquakes and volcanoes erupting around. Rick told Yukiya that the cry belonged to the Phoenix without a doubt, and there at the peak of the volcano they spotted the Phoenix, which was now going around rampaging in rage. While the Phoenix was furious, Yukiya noticed its feeling from this far, and they started walking towards it. When they got closer, Rick asked if they could make it from here, to which Yukiya said it would be a lot harder for him just to make his presence known to Phoenix by getting closer. Once they were close enough to the Phoenix glared at them, and Rick also alerted Yukiya that Phoenix had noticed them. Yukiya prepared himself to tame the Phoenix, but then he got to know about the inner feelings of the Phoenix along with its memories. Yukiya told Rick that the cause behind this anger of Phoenix seemed to be humans. Rick found it hard to believe since this place was miles away from any signs of life, to which Yukiya replied that it seems someone recently ventured here seeking the power of divine beast for himself. Thus, the Phoenix became raging because of the malicious humans, which evidently ended up troubling dwarves because of losing their forge to craft things. Rick asked if the Phoenix has also raged at Yukiya since he was a human, hearing which Yukiya nodded but chose to try his best to pull through this. He went to the Phoenix and expressed that he truly regretted that a human laid his hand on him, so now he wished to make amends on their behalf. The Phoenix doubtfully looked at Yukiya until he explained that the fire from this place was actually an essential part of dwarf life, so he requested Phoenix to calm his fury for their sake. And other than that, Yukiya promised Phoenix to take care of the human who dared to bother him. The Phoenix screamed as if it was about to attack Yukiya, but suddenly upon getting closer, the Phoenix stopped and looked at him in a friendly way as if he understood Yukiya wasn't a bad guy. Yukiya asked Phoenix if he would be willing to lend his strength to Yukiya, and the Phoenix was silent, meaning a yes to be tamed. Yukiya thanked the Phoenix for understanding him, and so he casted Tame on the Phoenix, and in the next moment the huge fire spirit turned into a little bird with a firestone on its head. Rick remarked that once it was all said and done, it turned out surprisingly easier than they expected, but on the other hand Yukiya was extremely drained from taming another divine beast again. Now he asked Phoenix if it would be willing to convince the fire spirits on the volcano to flow like before so that it would provide fire to Dwarf's forge. Phoenix nodded, and it solved the flame problem for the dwarf. Yukiya was glad everything was alright now, and Rick noticed even with the smaller size the Phoenix was still just as strong. Yukiya told him that taming wasn't about stealing power but boosting it, but aside from that he couldn't fathom which human would be after stealing the power of the Phoenix, since it wasn't some easy feat that could not be dared either without strength or foolishness. Meanwhile, back at Yukiya's rainforest territory, the elf butler retinue arrived only to learn that young Master Rick headed out to the land of the dwarves. Channel confirmed this, seeing that retinue supposed there was no helping it now, and since he was free, he offered to help out Channel until Rick gets back. Channel thought about it, then her butler Robin came and asked retinue to help him out with something. The work Robin needed help with was going through a pile of documents that would be required in establishments of their territory, and Robin had managed them by himself. Then Channel asked if he needed more help to maintain them. Robin said he already handled that part as well, but there were still some things like resource management and flood control for the development. However, he was still inexperienced in stuff like that. Retinue didn't mind helping and immediately got to work, while Robin assured Channel he and Retinue would handle the rest so she could attend to other things. Later, after walking out, Milia expressed how it feels like anything was possible with those two butlers around, although Rin mentioned those old men wouldn't be here forever. Thus it raises the problem of them needing to hire someone who could manage documents. Channel told Milia that her brother wished for Milia to handle some of the monsters for further development, hearing which she was pretty surprised because she didn't have confidence in taming monsters, much less evolved monsters. She thought that it was a miracle just to be able to take one monster, and now she was being asked to tame multiple monsters. No matter how effortlessly Yukiya made it look, she didn't think she could do something like that. She recalled how she was the one who had been berated as a useless, incompetent tamer a few years ago, when her siblings asked Channel to handle taming the monsters so that the funds given to Yukiya would be saved. The speaker was the first prince, Arun, and in response Milia tried to tell her brother it was tough, but his strict and angry gaze shut her mouth. It was when Milia's sister, the first princess Arya, spoke up. Why couldn't Milia do that much despite being from the royal family, or did she intend to tarnish their family's reputation? The second and third prince, Loxus and Gilia, also mocked Milia for being useless and wasting their time, and they wished to just remove their dependence on tamers as soon as possible. Milia didn't have a say among her siblings, so she was mostly ignored, and even the other caretakers among the castle called her as the failed princess, who did nothing but waste time talking to a good-for-nothing like Yukiya. Milia often stayed upset due to all of this, but Yukiya kept her cheered up, saying she wasn't a failure in any way, and even the beasts loved her, which showed she was indeed a good tamer. He believed she would one day be strong enough to tame a dragon, and he was sure she could take gentle care of the white dragon Patra as well. Milia got flustered, and she noticed how the tamed beasts used to interact with Yukiya with so much love and care, and they liked being taken care of by Yukiya as well. She found herself yearning to be a strong tamer just like him one day, and when the nation was near its ruin when the beasts rampaged around, Milia went to request Patra to lend her its strength. Patra got along with Milia, and that was when she finally managed to tame a beast, that too a dragon by herself. Now back to present, Milia got called out by Shauna, and she asked her if she was alright since Milia just zoned out like that. Milia replied she was fine, and while she thought about how Yukiya entrusted her with the role of a tamer to help out, she wanted to rise to the occasion to repay Yukiya's faith in her. Thus, after mustering up courage, Milia told Channel that she was all in to help out as best she could with her skills. Now after her newfound courage, Milia stated they need to start with picking a monster that looks capable of handling paperwork. Channel told her if she needed she could overwrite taming on some monsters already tamed by Yukiya, and keeping it in mind, Milia suggested it would be better if she just started literating the monsters to speak and write human language. She figured it was possible since these monsters here were evolved monsters and had higher intelligence. So for races like goblins, learning to speak and write wouldn't be possible, while for races like kobolds and insect-like beasts it would be a bit tough. Then she thought of something and asked Channel what monsters she thinks Yukiya would have chosen to do complex tasks. Channel knew that her brother knew more about monsters than anyone else, so she mentioned Yukiya would have either tried to teach everyone to read and write. Although she didn't think it was a good idea to try to do what her brother would, hearing Milia point out that Channel seemed to love her brother quite much. Channel immediately yelled that wasn't it, and why would she say something like that so randomly? Milia chuckled looking at Channel's flustered expression, and Channel began trying to hide her face within her hands. Milia told her not to worry, as her blushing face wasn't subtle enough for others to notice, after which they got right back to the main matter. Milia stated that she really wanted to meet Yukiya's expectations, but at this point she lacked skills to teach monsters how to read and write, so she wanted to change her approach and try to find someone who knew both monsters and human language. Channel asked her who could they approach for something like that, to which Milia replied they should approach either a demon or a dragon kind for this. Channel stated both of them were legendary creatures, so it was hard to say they really exist, to which Milia reasoned they must exist, as she once secretly read the forbidden records at the royal capital, in which she learned about elves, dwarves, and sacred beasts. There was everything detailed in the records, including their habitats, and according to the direction Yukiya went off to reach Dwarf Kingdom, it was quite accurate just like it was written in those records. Thus she believed if they followed the directions for other races, she should be able to meet the legendary races. However, there was a risk they might resort to force without warning, so it would be wise to be careful in this. Channel asked her how could they even approach beings that dangerous, and Milia took out her magical box which contained really rare treasures she planned on negotiating with to approach the other races. Channel asked if that was really okay, to which Milia replied it was not a big deal, and making use of these treasures would be better than leaving them to rot. Milia had even some national treasure-level items in her collection, which might be able to get races that value them a lot like Oni. Channel asked what she would do if she would be up against a dragon kin, to which she replied that they actually value these extremely valuable jewels more than anyone, but it was harder to come across them than the demons. Channel suggested their first stop should be the demons then, hearing which Milia prepared to head out right away. Channel stopped her and asked if she was going alone, and Milia didn't want to trouble anyone for her sake. Then Robin came and said he shall accompany Milia in that case, since she needs to have backup in case of emergency. Milia noticed Robin was giving off an aura like that of knight captains. Then Charlotte came with some valuable informative scrolls and gave them to Milia, stating it would be better with more bargaining chips at her disposal. Next, Milia summoned her tamed white dragon Patra, and told it to take care of her in the way. However, Milia was not sure about keeping Patra, since it originally used to be Yukia's familiar. Channel assured her she didn't have to worry about her brother, since Yukia treated all the creatures of the palace as if they were children, and Patra was the same for him. So from Yukia's perspective, he would be happy that Patra has been kept by a good person like Milia, who would take good care of it. And either way, Channel hoped Yukia would find a partner worthy of his taming skills, having high hopes for the spirit turtle. She knew the spirit turtle would willingly do anything Yukia asked of it because of his taming charm, so in any way Milia didn't have to worry about her brother. Milia thanked Channel and told her she was truly a thoughtful and kind soul like her brother. And it wasn't just Channel, but everyone else here was also just as supportive, and everything they did was for Yukia's sake. So with that in mind, Milia prepared herself to do her best to become a part of the Rainforest clan, but then she corrected herself. It wasn't like marrying into the clan, but instead contributing as much she could for them. Robin told her such concerns were unnecessary here, and Channel added she doesn't have to push herself too hard either, because either way, Milia has already become someone truly special to her. Hearing this made Milia flustered, and from this interaction she recalled the Rainforest family wasn't only good at taming, but also their way of enchanting other people. Now she got on Patra and was ready to head off to her journey to find the demon race people. She waved byes to everyone, while Robin was following her on foot by running. Milia asked Robin if he was really planning to run all the way, to which Robin replied that was the plan. But she felt bad and asked him to hop on as well. Robin obeyed her and jumped on Patra, and with this both of them flew off together to find the village of the demon folk. After some time, Milia found out that just like the details according to forbidden records, there was indeed the village of the demon in further this direction. Once they arrived at the entrance, they got down from the dragon. But suddenly Milia found herself to be ambushed by the demons, and they even surrounded Patra and Robin. The demon in front asked Milia who they were, to which she replied to have come from the Rainforest territory, and she wished to have an audience with the demon king. The demon said why would they allow a mere little girl to talk with their king. Then a demon woman came and told the demon in charge that the demon king allowed these visitors to come. The demon couldn't intervene now, and so the demon girl guided Milia to the residence of their demon king. Later, Milia was sitting face to face with the demon king, and he introduced himself as Goma, and asked her what business does a human like her have with him. Goma had a terrifying face, and what's more terrifying was the overwhelming aura he was emitting. Milia introduced herself and stated that she had come to speak with him as the envoy of the Rainforest territory. Right after these words were spoken, the short-tempered demon Seki stepped ahead, startling her, as he yelled why did this Rainforest territory only send a little girl as their messenger. Other demons began to look at her with angry eyes. Milia couldn't afford to falter now since she came here as a representative of the Rainforest territory, so she couldn't let anyone look down upon her, and with determination, Milia introduced herself as the proud princess of the kingdom of Zeals. Thus she was not a mere messenger. Seki exclaimed no title would be good enough to come to the demon king for negotiation. Goma quieted Seki and asked what it was that a princess of a crumbling kingdom wanted to discuss with him. Milia flinched upon this as she didn't expect that news to reach this far from the kingdom. Goma frowned, thinking she came here thinking that demons were in the dark and unaware about the outside. And other than that, Goma told her she shouldn't have said she was princess of another kingdom if she came here as representative of Rainforest territory. Thus Goma found her just a pushover, and this feeling cornered her with tension. Milia knew if she spoke any more foolishly, the negotiations would be off. She made it clear that she has come to propose an alliance with the Rainforest territory. Goma figured he couldn't ignore new rising powers, which made Milia think it was going well, until Goma told her to arrange gold, wines, and females of any race for the negotiation, and in exchange he would guarantee that demons won't make any moves against their territory. Milia was shocked because this was basically a one-sided deal, and the other demons around were also looking down on her now. She thought negotiation was a game where the side with the boldest words won, so she just brought out the treasure and said she couldn't accept the terms Goma presented, but she got these items for the negotiation. She stated that the thing they were after was the talent of demons. Then Seki groaned again and Goma quieted him down. He examined the pieces she brought were indeed of quality, and he didn't think it would be a problem to send demons to help out in exchange for these goods. Hearing this brought a smile upon Milia's face, but Goma wasn't done as he declared that negotiation actually could only exist when both parties stand on equal ground, so he doesn't see how Milia was on equal ground to do a negotiation with the Demon King. Milia asked what he meant by that, to which Goma replied that he didn't feel any strength from Milia or the guy behind her, so why would he take their words seriously? Thus Goma didn't care what intention she came from. He didn't want to waste his time on pointless chatter with the weaklings. He deemed Milia narrow-minded to even think this could work against the Demon King, and she would simply get what she wanted. Milia suddenly felt pressuring the aura of the Demon King, along with the threat from Goma, that he and other demons were always ready to go to a war, so if he wanted he could just force Milia and her territory to submit under him and serve him as laborers instead. Milia was damned with how things turned out, and she found herself stuck because her fault was relying too much on Yukia's overwhelming power alone. The demons who were standing behind idle until now approached Milia and told her to hand over everything she has got. It was when the demon's hand was stopped by Robin. Then Seki warned him to step off before he broke Robin's old bones like biscuits. Robin gritted his teeth since there was a vast difference in their strengths, and Milia tried to get them to stop. But the demons didn't care for her plea and laughed, then told her that her faith was in her own hands. She could either accept their terms or just be killed here and lose everything. Robin was desperately trying to free themselves but couldn't budge the demon's hand. Goma was staring down at Milia, who seemed as if the whole world had turned upside down and there was no hope for her now. Her legs trembled as she was powerless in this situation. Then Seki came and mentioned that since she was riding a dragon earlier she must be a tamer. He asked mockingly if she wanted to give a shot at taming him. Other demons laughed it off saying she got no chance at all, and being the cornered one here left Milia with no option other than doing as these demons asked of her. It was when a tame magic was casted from the side and Seki and other demons instantly submitted, being unable to move. Milia turned to look at the source of this tame, and the tamer turned out to be none other than Yukia, who arrived here just in time to save Milia. She was relieved as Yukia frozen the demons around her, and she was sure it would be alright now that Yukia was here, whereas Yukia was visibly angry, and now he don't feel like providing proper negotiating terms to demons like he planned to before. Rick agreed with Yukia, and said after what these demons did, it would be best if Yukia just make all these demons submit at once. Seki was pissed off upon hearing this, but he and other demons couldn't do anything but ask for forgiveness. Yukia then looked at Milia, and he didn't like her trembling in fear. He went to her and held her in his arms, stating the demons must have scared her. He gave a sharp look at Goma, whereas Goma seemed even more furious and he started emitting his aura at uninvited guests. Yukia figured if it was about actions more than words, he responded the Demon King's furious aura by emitting his own insanely strong aura towards Goma. Goma flinched when he noticed Yukia already possessed the aura of a true demon lord, thus he stepped towards Yukia, saying they could have a talk after a showdown. Yukia didn't faze by the Demon King Goma, who proposed that in the end it was strength that mattered for a demon warrior. Yukia told him if he lost, Goma would have to play by his rules, to which Goma replied he didn't care as he would follow the strong, which was the way of the demon. Yukia accepted to go through that rule. Then he released the tame on other demons and asked them to step back and not dare to make a move behind his back. Yukia and the Demon King now were facing off against each other, and Goma declared the beginning of the battle. Yukia took the challenge and the first move was made by Goma, who charged at Yukia with a powerful punch that almost landed on Yukia. Milia shouted out of concern, but in reality Yukia managed to activate the shield barrier which he got from taming Spirit Turtle. Rick was smiling as he knew Yukia would be fine, while the other demons were shocked seeing a human managing to block their Demon King's attack. Rick explained to Milia that Yukia has actually mastered the powers of the divine beast Spirit Turtle, so he wouldn't have trouble defending anything, let alone the Demon King's attacks. Goma taunted Yukia if he would keep on defending himself forever, and Yukia knew he couldn't do that as well and needed to attack. The Demon King was mad at this, so he stepped back saying if Yukia had no intention of fighting back, then he would just crush Yukia's shield with all he got. Goma charged up his strongest attack and transferred all the magic power to his next punch, which was strong enough to take a form of its own. He charged again at Yukia to finish it all at once, and Yukia didn't intend to just stand idle. He He wasn't sure about attacking because the attack he was going to use was still a new move for him, so he couldn't correctly balance the power behind it and might end up killing Goma. Goma found this threat intriguing and he still rushed in for an all-out clash. But to his surprise, Yukiya easily managed to evade his punch by ducking and released a counterattack right after it with an intense look in his eyes. Yukiya's attack was so powerful that his overflowing magic power took the shape of Phoenix, and he landed that powerful punch straight on Goma's stomach. Yukiya stood still since he didn't take any damage, whereas Goma was struggling because the punch Yukiya just landed was too hot even for his skin, which was burned black from the flames. Goma began having trouble standing on his feet, so he got on his knees and admitted his defeat. He told Yukiya he was free to do as he pleased, and if he wanted he could spill his guts right here. Yukiya replied firmly that he just needed some folks from this village to help him explain his territory, and he wished to fortify his kingdom as once including the demons in it. Goma and other demons immediately accepted Yukiya's orders and hailed him as their new king. Yukiya chuckled and said they could relax, and he apologized for taming Seki forcefully earlier. Seki said he had no trouble from it, and if Yukiya wished to, he could tame him again, since earlier he felt a sudden surge of power from taming which made him feel even stronger than Demon King Goma. Goma punched Seki for speaking nonsense and told him not to get too ahead of himself. Now Goma dragged Seki by the collar and went to Milia to apologize for causing her trouble before. Milia mentioned it was her fault to have underestimated the negotiations with other races, and this incident has been quite the learning experience for her. She smiled and wished to stand as comrades with demons from now on, and hoped they would take care of things. The demons found her smile charming and they looked forward to working with her. Seki asked Robin how his shoulder feels now, to which he replied it was fine, and Rick mentioned now that things were handled nicely. They should head back. Then Yukiya suddenly had Phoenix and Spirit Turtle cheering for how they helped Yukiya, seeing which Yukiya was happy, and now things with the demon clan were further decided over discussions. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the northern forest, a guy on a dragon was finding where the rainforest territory was. This person was the first prince of Zeals, Arun, and on his way he came across a wolf-like beast which seemed to have gotten out of the royal palace recently. Arun grinned as he decided to make that wolf as his first target and approached it from behind, unknown to what circumstances this would lead him to. Later, Yukiya returned back to his land and he was impressed by the sight of developments made in the short time he was away. He praised everyone for working hard and landed down on the ground. He thanked everyone and the dragons for traveling with him. Then Channel immediately came to tell Yukiya about the trouble. She told him that goblins were getting a bit hard to manage, and when Yukiya turned to check out why that was, he noticed all the goblins were cheerful upon seeing Yukiya, and they were all speaking human language. They welcomed Yukiya back home, while Yukiya was wondering why they were able to speak like that. Rick mentioned it must be because Yukiya tamed Phoenix, which boosted Yukiya's taming abilities, and it also affected other tamed monsters, making them able to speak now. Yukiya figured it wasn't bad now that he could communicate with others through speaking commonly. Then Milia came and mentioned how amazing it was Yukiya could help monsters grow even without training them. But compared to that, she thought she only caused trouble and didn't help in any way. Channel noticed the grim face of Milia. Then she asked Yukiya about the new monster he tamed. Yukiya told her that he happened to have tamed the divine spirit Phoenix while he was in the land of dwarves, and he promised to take care of the guy who planned on misusing the power of Phoenix. Milia wasn't that much surprised at Yukiya managing to tame his second divine beast, and she assured Milia not to be down since it was just that her brother was so beyond the ordinary. Milia appreciated Channel's cheer, and after that, Yukiya informed everyone that he also brought the demon named Seki from the demon clan with him. Seki had a frightening face which scared Rin, and she quickly went behind the tree in fear. Seki assured them that he wasn't angry at all, but it seemed it would take some time for them. Other than that, Yukiya informed Channel that the village of demons would also come under the rule of their rainforest territory, and currently Robin was coming on foot with other demons who would join them later. He added that he also managed to successfully forge an alliance with the dwarves, so he thinks about 50 dwarves would be coming over soon. Channel was caught off guard by that many. Then Rick mentioned he would also be getting 20 more elves from his kingdom to help out. Channel was caught off guard by that many at once, since she would have to arrange places to stay for them. Then 3 goblins stepped forward claiming she could leave that task to them, as they would make sure to put the skills of crafting Robin taught them to use. He asked other monsters to help him out, and together they went off to get things done as soon as possible. Yukiya looked at them going, then he heard the elder goblin who was happy to see that his son was growing up to be a fine goblin, which was a lot better than compared to the time when he was the troublemaker wreaking havoc in the fields of Rizdal village. Elder Goblin requested Yukiya to look after his son from here on out, and Yukiya felt warmth in his request. After that, the Elder Goblin went to head back to their village some distance away from here, and now Yukiya knew that he needed to step up as well since everyone was working so hard. Over time, all the monsters were working hard together with Yukiya to develop the houses and everything, and they also practiced hunting skills taught by Seki. Some of the goblins helped out Charla in the kitchen making dishes, while Rin worked on tree houses and paths with nature magic. After some time, Yukiya was greeted by the dwarves who arrived here after a long journey, and they asked right away how their workshops were. Yukiya apologized to them because he was so swamped with getting the place to stay ready that he couldn't get workshops done in time. The dwarves got stiff upon hearing that. Then they just commented it couldn't be helped so Yukiya could leave the construction part to them from here on. The dwarves were actually excited to have their first job to make their own workshop. They asked Yukiya if they could use the cave present in this area as their base, and Yukiya was glad these guys were excited about working. Soon Robin also returned with other demons who seemed to have gotten tired on the way. Yukiya was surprised because Robin came too quickly considering he came here on foot, to which Robin replied he couldn't afford to be out of work taking off for too many days, so he just hurried here. Other demons said they had a really hard time keeping up with Robin. Then Yukiya told Channel that he actually tamed all of the demons tribe, and he left Seki in charge of them. Seki began giving instructions to demons about what their tasks were, and Adori also introduced himself to them. It was when Adori saw in the sky as the other 20 elves arrived as well. Rick was glad to see the elves made it sooner than expected, as he thought it would take at least 10 years for them to arrive. Now that everyone arrived, Channel told Yukiya they should first take an overall look at the situation. Yukiya examined there were currently 5 in total, Channel and other humans. Then next up it was Rin, Adori, and a crew of 20 newcomer elves. Other than that, there was Rick and retinue who were supposed to stop by regularly whenever needed. But Rick preferred if possible he would stay by Yukiya's side, which was far too comfortable for him, and he didn't feel like going back anytime soon. Yukiya asked if it was truly acceptable to be away from his land for so long, to which Rick replied since he was tamed by Yukiya, he would prefer to stay with him until his lifespan runs out. Retinue also said they could afford this little time here since they were elves, and then Yukiya proceeded to add there were 50 dwarves and 20 demons on their side. Other than that, he also had 20,000 tamed monsters, and lastly there were spirit turtles and the phoenix as well. Rick mentioned their forces already outmatched that of the Kingdom of Zeals. Yukiya smiled, being grateful to have the support of so many, and he promised to do his best for those who put their faith in him. It was when a goblin from the far goblin village came to inform Yukiya they were under attack, making Yukiya feel the emergence of rushing there immediately. The goblin desperately repeated the alert, and Seki asked what exactly happened. Yukiya quickly called Channel, and she immediately checked with her birds what happened. She saw the situation of the goblin village was in turmoil, and the attackers seemed to have slipped away from their grasp. Yukiya hurriedly made his way to the goblin village and saw broken and burned houses, along with injured monsters. The sight of so many being injured was dreadful to Milia, and Yukiya exclaimed they quickly needed to help out everyone. He brought out potions and began distributing them to the wounded without any delay. Then he heard a crying voice of a goblin calling out to his father, and Yukiya observed that the elder goblin seemed to be moving at all. Yukiya could forget the kind elder goblin who requested Yukiya to take care of his son not long ago, and now no matter how furious and strong Yukiya was, he couldn't do anything except clench his fists and see the dead elder goblin. Other goblins apologized, claiming they should have trained better, but Yukiya felt all of this was more of his fault than anyone else because he should have first fortified the defenses of goblins by alerting other races to keep guard. He went to the son of the elder goblin and bowed down to apologize, stating he knew this won't bring back the dead, but he really felt guilty for not being able to save him. The goblin called Yukiya and asked him if he could get some healing potions, since no matter what he still needed to help out everyone else who was hurt. He believed that even his father would have wanted this right now. Yukiya was thinking of what to do next, and Rick told him that no matter the situation, a king should always look forward instead of dreading the past. Yukiya understood that, and he summoned another box of potions and gave it to a goblin to help out others. Yukiya wondered who on earth would dare to do something like this. Then he sensed a new presence, and Yukiya saw a familiar beast whose name was Rattle. However, Yukiya was surprised to see Rattle in a wounded state as well and having a hard time walking around. Rattle was about to fall, so Yukiya quickly hurried to him, and his sight fell upon the bleeding scar on its back. Yukiya asked Rattle what he was doing here and how he sustained those terrible wounds. Rick asked Yukiya about Rattle, to which Yukiya replied that Rattle was actually the Wolf Kingdom kept in preparation for war. And since they kept it for war, they used to regularly hit Rattle so that it would be more hostile to the targets. Yukiya mentioned the time when he went to get Rattle. He had already been gone from the cage and Yukiya thought he ran away because he was fed up with humans. But now it was in terrible state and Yukiya couldn't help but worry about the deep wound on it. Then Rin came and she was worried about the wolf, and when Yukiya was about to ask if she could do anything about this, Rick asked her if she was planning to heal the wound of Rattle. Yukiya asked surprised if Rin could really cast healing, to which Rick agreed but mentioned it wouldn't be that much, but they could at least save Rattle's life. Rin began casting healing magic and put her magic energy onto the spot where Rattle was wounded. While she was healing, Rick told Yukiya that Rin was similar to a priestess, and she could use the boundless lifespan of an elf to treat the wounds of others. Rin did her best to heal Rattle's wound, and she finally managed to stop the bleeding. But in this process, Rin got extremely exhausted and was about to fall on the ground. Yukiya went and caught her just in time, and Rin told him Rattle's life was now out of danger. Yukiya thanked her a lot for saving Rattle, then he asked Channel to take care of Rin. Now he went to Rattle and apologized for failing to find him and not being able to do anything since the day he last met Rattle. Rattle looked at Yukiya without any grudge. Then Rick translated it for Yukiya that Rattle wasn't feeling any hostility for Yukiya. Channel added that actually Rattle admired Yukiya a lot, and then Rattle got up and began licking Yukiya out of care and admiration towards him. Rick assured it must be because on days when Rattle was in the kingdom, he was saved by the presence of Yukiya, and that was precisely why it actually escaped the cage in search of Yukiya. Rick was pretty good at understanding what Rattle was saying, and Yukiya asked Rattle if he really forgave him. Rattle seemed happy and both of them hugged since things were fine now. But unfortunately, their problems didn't end there when Yukiya heard Milia's scared voice when she claimed to have remembered something. Yukiya asked her what happened, to which she replied that the scar was actually inflicted by her scary brother Arun's sword. Yukiya asked if she was sure it was the Prince of Zeals behind this, since he was said to be on an important mission. But putting that aside, when Yukiya looked at how much everyone suffered from this, from Rattle to the goblins and even the loss of Elder Goblin's life, he couldn't let this pass without making sure to show no mercy from on to those who dare harm anyone here. Meanwhile, back in the royal palace of Zeals, Arun arrived and reported his return to the king that he came rushing here in response to the summons. The king thanked Arun for his efforts on the mission. Then Arun mentioned the situation of the castle, and the whole city looked very dire, and just from one look he could see it was a very dreadful state which couldn't be thought of happening at the hands of a mere caretaker. The king agreed they were indeed in a predicament, and other nobles didn't know what they could possibly do either. It was when the second Prince Loxus spoke up that since he was here, they don't have to fear because it was only a matter of time before Rainforest family would already have become unnecessary for them, so it doesn't matter if they left on their own beforehand, because Loxus have finally completed his research. King asked if it means Loxus was successful in his mission, and in response Loxus grinned and claimed that he did succeed in mass-producing and enhancing magical beasts. King praised Loxus by this success, and then Loxus mentioned that he had even arrived here to the castle by riding on the artificial dragon he created. He asked Arun if he liked his ride, to which Arun replied that this artificial dragon was actually faster and stronger than that white dragon managed by Yukiya. King sighed and said since their all familiars were taken, the artificial beasts were the only key to their defense, and thankfully he could breathe easy now that it was complete. Loxus asked King if he really intended to let go of Yukiya just like that, to which King nodded since Yukiya was a formidable opponent for them. Arun asked if that was really the case, since he fought Yukiya's subordinates before and they were no challenge at all. King jumped in shock asking if Arun already crossed blades with Yukiya, to which Arun replied that he just cleared up a village which was under Yukiya's tiny hideout, and in a way he also saw a beast, which wasn't even a match for him. King asked if Arun really managed to take down some of Yukiya's monsters, and Arun asserted he dealt a significant blow to that beast. Other nobles in the courtyard praised Arun for this impressive feat, while Arun proposed to the king that they must officially reclaim what their nation lost, its power. Loxus agreed with this and claimed that with the power of artificial beasts, nothing could stand in their way. King agreed as well with the words of his sons, thus he ordered everyone to gather around and declared that the time had come for their kingdom to rise once more. And to do that, the king ordered their first duty would be to take down Ukiah Rainforest and destroy his territory. Meanwhile, back in Ukiah's territory, Milia woke up and she realized that she was in an unfamiliar room. Milia recalled how she fainted after seeing the scars left by her brother on Rattle. Then the door of her room began to be knocked that completely startled her. It was Ukiah knocking on the door asking Milia if she had calmed down. Milia quickly set her hair and outfit before letting Ukiah come into the room, after which he asked her how was her health now while handing her a cup of milk. Milia replied she was totally fine, and when she asked what was in the cup, Ukiah told her he recently procured milk from the livestock sent by the kingdom as compensation before. She happily gave the milk a try and liked drinking it, and it was when she noticed that it was just her and Ukiah in the room. She recalled how she had always been outside whenever these two were together, so she didn't feel shy before, but now that they were in a room, she couldn't help but feel shy and flustered. Then Ukiah asked her what it was she mentioned about Arun, hearing which made her expression go pale. Ukiah told her she didn't have to speak if it was hard, and she chose to speak despite her own trauma because Ukiah was really trying hard here, so she must also brace herself to handle the situations about to come. She told Ukiah that her brother, or Prince Arun, was a genius prodigy who excelled both in academics and martial arts, and when she was a child, she once ventured into the woods with her brother when he invited her. It was when she was joyed over a sight of a cute rabbit and told her brother about it. Arun grinned and suddenly he struck the rabbit with his sword in a cross pattern to kill it, and this sight left Milia extremely shocked because it was just an innocent harmless rabbit his brother just killed. He intentionally left a deep wound shaped like a cross, and other knights around them just praised Arun, while Milia cried over poor soul dying miserably. Arun told her that beasts were meant to be subdued by sheer strength, thus he always believed that there was no need for tamers in this country. And ever since that time, she has had a hard time talking to her brother, because despite that she still didn't want to give up on becoming a tamer. She loved how one could connect hearts through conversations with animals and magical beasts, to which Ukiah replied while patting her head that she wasn't wrong at all, so she doesn't have to worry about that now. Milia agreed with him, and it made her calm, but suddenly Ukiah realized he might have acted too weird by patting her. Milia felt extremely shy, as if she just acted like a child, and now she wanted to prove she was also a responsible person. Thus she called out Ukiah, and after mustering her strength, Ukiah smiled when Milia asked her to let her handle this matter about her brother.